On Thanksgiving, my stepmother slapped me so hard my ears rang, right in front of guests who pretended not to see. 5 minutes later, the front doors blew open, and my billionaire grandma walked in with no invitation. By Christmas, my stepmother would be in handcuffs, and my father would be begging me for mercy. They thought I was just the quiet girl paying their bills. They had no idea I was about to own their whole world. My name is Lena Carver. I am 32 years old, and in the professional world of Denver, that name carries a specific kind of weight. At Heliofort Cyber Defense, where I serve as the technical director, I command a team of 50 elite security analysts. I am the person Fortune 500 companies call when their firewalls are bleeding data. I make a high six-figure salary. I own a penthouse downtown that overlooks the Rockies, and I have built a life defined by competence, precision, and absolute independence. But as I turned my Audi off the highway and navigated the winding, oak-lined streets of Lakewood Heights, I felt that familiar, suffocating transformation take hold. The confident executive dissolved, replaced by the family's designated wallet. Lakewood Heights was the kind of suburb where the lawns were manicured to within an inch of their lives, and the neighbors judged you by the year of your luxury SUV. It was a theater of wealth, and today, for Thanksgiving, I was driving onto a stage where I had inadvertently become the sole financial sponsor. I pulled into the driveway of my father's house. It was a sprawling colonial revival. Painted a crisp, fresh white with black shutters, it looked impeccable. It looked prosperous. It looked like a lie. My grip tightened on the leather steering wheel. I stared at the new slate roof. That roof had cost $35,000 last spring. My father had called me in a panic, talking about leaks destroying the structural integrity, claiming he was short on cash until his investment dividends cleared. I had wired the money within an hour. The dividends never cleared because they did not exist. I stepped out of the car, the cold November wind biting at my cheeks. I smoothed down my coat, checking my reflection in the side mirror. I looked composed. I looked like a dutiful daughter coming home for the holidays. Inside my chest, however over, a quiet fury was beginning to simmer, a pressure that had been building for 10 years. I walked up the brick path, relayed 2 years ago, $6,000, and before I could even ring the bell, the door swung open. Victoria stood there, my stepmother. She was in her early 50s and looked spectacular. I had to give her that. She was wearing a cashmere sweater in a soft cream color that probably cost more than my first car, paired with tailored trousers that accentuated her slender figure. Her blonde hair was coiffed into an effortless bob, and her makeup was flawless. She radiated the energy of a woman who had never scrubbed a toilet in her life. "Lena!" she exclaimed, throwing her arms open, for the benefit of the neighbors who might be watching. She pulled me into a hug that looked warm but felt like being squeezed by a python. As her cheek pressed against mine, the performance dropped for exactly 2 seconds. "You are late," she hissed into my ear, her voice dropping an octave, stripping away the sugary veneer. "The Petersons arrived 10 minutes ago. Try to look a little less like you would rather be at a funeral." She pulled back, beaming a bright, terrifying smile at me. "Oh, look at you. Always so serious with that dark hair. We really must get you to my stylist. Darling, you look exhausted." Traffic was heavy coming out of the city. "Victoria," I said, my voice flat. "Excuses. Always excuses." She breezed past me, waving a manicured hand. "Well, come in. Don't let the heat out. We are paying a fortune for heating oil this year." We are paying. The irony was so sharp it almost cut my tongue. I had paid the utility bills for this house every month for the last 5 years. Victoria and my father had not paid for heat, electricity, or water since Obama was in office. I walked into the foyer. The house smelled of roasting turkey, sage, and expensive perfume. It was the scent of a perfect American holiday. To my left, the dining room was set with the good china, my mother's china, actually, from before she died, though Victoria had long since claimed it as her own. "Daniel, look who finally decided to grace us with her presence," Victoria called out. My father, Daniel Carver, emerged from the living room. He was holding a tumbler of scotch, the amber liquid catching the light. At 62, he was still a handsome man, with silver hair and the confident posture of a captain of industry. The problem was, his industry had capsized 15 years ago. He had been a mid-level businessman who got lucky once in the 90s and had been chasing that high ever since. Now, he was technically retired, which in his case meant he spent his days playing golf at a club I paid the membership fees for and managing an investment portfolio that was mostly smoke and mirrors. "Lena," he said, nodding at me. He didn't hug me. He looked me up and down, checking my attire to ensure I wouldn't embarrass him. Then his eyes drifted past me to the driveway. "Is that the Audi? You know, I was reading about the transmission issues on the new models. You should have leased the Mercedes like I told you." "The car is fine, Dad," I said, suppressing the urge to scream. "Happy Thanksgiving!" Right. Happy Thanksgiving." He took a sip of his scotch. "Chase is in the living room holding court. Go say hello. I need to check the wine. We bought a case of that Cabernet your aunt likes, $200 a bottle. So try not to guzzle it." I watched him walk toward the kitchen. I had transferred $5,000 to his account last Tuesday because he said he needed to cover unexpected property taxes. I realize now that the property taxes were actually a case of vintage wine and a new outfit for Victoria. I moved into the living room. The space had been recently renovated. The old cozy fireplace had been replaced with a modern gas insert surrounded by imported Italian marble. That was another $12,000 I had said goodbye to last Christmas. Sprawled on the leather sectional was my half-brother, Chase. At 28, Chase was the physical embodiment of unearned confidence. He was handsome in a soft, unworked way, wearing a designer polo shirt and loafers with no socks. He was currently gesturing expansively to my Uncle Robert and Aunt Sarah, who were listening with polite fascination. "It is all about leverage," Chase was saying, swirling his drink. "See, traditional employment is a trap. I am building an ecosystem. The beta launch for my new platform is going to revolutionize how people buy luxury goods in the metaverse. We are looking at a valuation of $10 million by Q3. I stood in the archway, listening to him. Chase had never held a job for longer than 3 months. His startups were a series of websites that never launched, and business cards that listed him as CEO of companies that had no employees. I paid his rent. I paid his car insurance. I paid his cell phone bill. He looked up and saw me. "Lena, the corporate drone returns." Uncle Robert and Aunt Sarah turned to smile at me. "Hello, Lena," Aunt Sarah said kindly. "How is the computer thing going?" "It is going well, Aunt Sarah," I said, forcing a smile. "We just secured a contract with the Department of Defense." "That is nice, dear," she said, clearly not understanding. She turned back to Chase. "So, tell us more about this metaverse. Chase, it sounds so futuristic. You really have your father's business sense." I felt a vein throb in my temple. I walked over to the wet bar, installed last summer, $8,000, and poured myself a glass of sparkling water. I needed to stay sharp. The house began to fill up. Cousins I hadn't seen in a year. Distant relatives from Victoria's side. The noise level rose, a cacophony of laughter and clinking glasses. I moved through the room like a ghost, a spectator at my own expense. "Oh, look at this kitchen," I heard Cousin Marie exclaim. I followed the voices into the kitchen. It was the crown jewel of the house. We were talking about a full gut renovation, custom cabinetry, a massive island topped with quartzite, a 6-burner Viking range, and a sub-zero fridge hidden behind cabinet panels. The total cost had been over $80,000. I had drained my entire savings account 3 years ago to pay for it, because Victoria had cried for weeks about how the old stove was a fire hazard, and she was terrified of burning the house down. Victoria was standing by the island, directing the catering staff she had hired. Yes, she wasn't even cooking. "You have outdone yourself, Victoria," Marie said, running her hand over the counter. "This stone is exquisite, and the layout, it is so open." Victoria preened, adjusting her pearls. "Well, you know me. I believe the kitchen is the heart of the home. Daniel and I wanted to create a space where everyone feels welcome. It was a labor of love, really. I spent months picking out the finishes. Daniel is so lucky to have someone who can manage a household like this, Marie gushed. It must cost a fortune to maintain. We manage, Victoria said with a humble, martyr-like sigh. It takes a lot of juggling, but for family, it is worth every penny. I stood by the pantry door, my knuckles white as I gripped my glass. Labor of love? The only labor involved was me working 80-hour weeks to cover the invoices she forwarded to my email with subject lines like urgent and please handle. Daniel walked in, clapping a hand on Chase's shoulder as my brother entered the kitchen. Have you heard Chase's pitch? Daniel announced to the room, his voice booming. Boy is a shark, a real shark. He is going to put the Carver name back on the map. What about Lena? Someone asked. I think it was a second cousin from Ohio. Doesn't she have a big job in the city? Daniel waved his hand dismissively, as if swatting away a fly. Oh, Lena does something with technical support or servers. Good steady paycheck. Keeps the lights on in her little apartment. But Chase? Chase is the visionary. He is aiming for the stars. The room nodded in appreciation of the visionary. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. It wasn't just the money. It was the erasure. I wasn't just unappreciated. I was invisible. They had taken my labor, my success, and my sacrifice, and they had consumed it, metabolizing it into their own status while leaving me as nothing more than a footnote. I slipped out of the kitchen, needing air. I walked down the hallway toward the powder room. As I passed the den, I heard hushed voices. The door was slightly ajar. It was Aunt Sarah and Uncle Robert again. The house looks incredible, Robert was whispering. Daniel must be doing better than we thought. Please, Sarah whispered back. Daniel hasn't made a dime in a decade. It is Victoria. She is a magician with money. But you know what I heard? What? I heard his mother, Eleanor, is on her last legs. They say she has gone completely senile, locked away in some assisted living facility in Connecticut. I froze. Grandma Eleanor. Is there any money left there? Robert asked. I thought the old bird lost it all in the crash. That is what Daniel says, Sarah replied. But rumors are rumors. If there is anything left, Victoria will sniff it out. She has been very attentive to the old woman's lawyers lately. I bet they are just waiting for her to kick the bucket so they can cash out. Victoria is smart. She knows how to secure the bag. I moved away from the door, my heart hammering against my ribs. Grandma Eleanor. I hadn't seen my grandmother in 7 years. After my grandfather died, she had retreated from the family. Daniel always told us she had become bitter and reclusive, that she didn't want to see us. He told us she had made bad investments and lost the family fortune, leaving only a modest pension. He painted her as a frail, angry old woman who hated everyone. Because of that, I had stopped trying to call. I assumed she didn't want me. I locked myself in the bathroom and leaned against the marble sink. $2,000. I stared at my reflection. I looked successful. I looked strong. But in this house, I was a child again, desperate for approval, buying love with wire transfers. Why did I do it? Guilt, a deep, programmed guilt implanted by my father after my mom died. Family helps family. You are the successful one. Your brother needs a leg up. I sacrificed everything to raise you. I pulled my phone out of my clutch to check the time. I wanted to leave. I wanted to get back to Denver, to my quiet penthouse, to a world where facts mattered more than feelings. The screen lit up with a notification, a text message. It was from a number I did not recognize. Area code 203, Connecticut. I swiped it open. Don't let them force you to sign any more papers today. I stared at the screen, my breath catching in my throat. The English translation ran through my mind instantly. Don't let them force you to sign any more papers today. Signed E. Eleanor? My hands started to tremble. It couldn't be. Dad said she was barely lucid. Dad said she couldn't even use a smartphone. I read the message again. It was precise. It was a command, not a suggestion, and it was timely. How did she know? How did she get my number? A sudden sharp rap on the bathroom door made me jump. "Lena?" It was Victoria's voice, sweet and cloying again. "Darling, are you in there? Dinner is about to be served. Come on out. We have a surprise for you. A little business opportunity the family wants to discuss." A chill went down my spine that had nothing to do with the drafty window. A business opportunity. That meant they wanted money. I looked at the phone again. Don't let them force you to sign. I slipped the phone back into my bag. I took a deep breath, smoothing my skirt. I didn't know if the text was real, or a prank, or a ghost from the past. But as I unlocked the door and prepared to face the dining room full of people eating food I bought, on plates I owned, in a house I maintained, I felt a strange new sensation. It wasn't just anger anymore, it was suspicion. I opened the door. Victoria was standing there, smiling like a shark that smelled blood in the water. "There you are," she cooed, linking her arm through mine. "Come sit down. Chase has put together a fascinating proposal, and we think you are going to want to be a part of it." "I am sure I will," I said, my voice steady, though my mind was racing. I walked with her toward the dining room, toward the stage, but for the first time in 10 years. I wasn't just walking into an ambush, I was walking in with a warning. The air in the dining room was thick with heat and the smell of roasted meat. Daniel sat at the head of the table, carving the turkey with a grand flourish. Chase was pouring wine, laughing at something Uncle Robert said. They looked so comfortable, so secure. I sat down at my assigned seat, not at the head, not near the center, but at the far end, near the kitchen door, the seat for the help. "To family!" Daniel raised his glass, his face flushed with pride and liquor. To family," everyone echoed. I raised my glass, but I didn't drink. I touched the cold crystal to my lips and watched them. I watched my father, the fraud. I watched my stepmother, the manipulator. I watched my brother, the parasite. And for the first time, I wondered if the person who sent that text was watching them too. Victoria stood up, tapping her fork against her crystal wine glass. The sharp, insistent chinking sound cut through the low hum of conversation in the dining room. She waited until every eye was fixed on her before she began. She placed a hand over her heart, her eyes shimmering with a wetness that looked impressively genuine. "I just want to say," she began, her voice trembling with carefully curated emotion, "how incredibly blessed I feel today. Family is everything. It is the anchor in the storm. When I married Daniel 20 years ago, I knew I wasn't just taking a husband. I was taking on the sacred duty of holding this home together. It has not always been easy. There have been sacrifices. Oh, so many sacrifices. But looking around this table, seeing the love here, I know every sleepless night was worth it." She wiped a solitary tear from her cheek, careful not to smudge her mascara. Around the table, heads nodded sympathetically. My aunts and uncles murmured their agreement, completely captivated by the performance. My father, Daniel, stood up next, his face flushed with red wine and pride. He wrapped an arm around Victoria's waist, pulling her close. "To my beautiful wife," he boomed, "this woman is a saint. She keeps this ship afloat. And to my son, Chase," he gestured to my half-brother, who was leaning back in his chair with a smirk that bordered on arrogance. "Chase has been my rock this year, always there with a new idea, a new vision. It is good to have a son who understands the weight of legacy." Daniel paused, his eyes sliding over me as if I were a piece of furniture that didn't quite match the decor. "And of course, Lena," he added, his tone dropping to the obligatory mumble one uses for the fine print on a contract. "Lena helps out a little bit here and there, too. We appreciate it." The dismissal hit me like a physical blow to the chest, but I kept my face impassive. Helps out a little bit. I had literally paid for the chair he was sitting on. Victoria sat down, smoothing her napkin over her lap. She looked across the table at me, her smile tightening just a fraction at the corners. "Lena is wonderful," Victoria said, loud enough for the entire table to hear. She is so career-focused. Sometimes I worry she is too focused on machines and not enough on people. She can be a little rigid, hard to connect with. I keep telling her, if she would just learn to be a little softer, a little more generous with her spirit, life would be so much easier for everyone. I am plenty generous, Victoria, I said, keeping my voice level. Of course you are, darling, she said dismissively. In your own way. Chase cleared his throat loudly. This was the signal. I saw him reach under his chair and pull out a thick, glossy presentation folder. He tossed it onto the center of the table, right next to the gravy boat. Speaking of generosity and vision, Chase said, sitting up straighter, I have been working on something huge. Project Horizon. It is a luxury eco-resort concept in Costa Rica. The land rights are securing next week, but we need bridge capital to lock in the contractors. He looked at me, his eyes gleaming with predatory hunger. We are keeping it in the family, Daniel interjected, leaning forward. We want to give you the first right of refusal. Lena, it is a guaranteed 300% return within 2 years. We need $1,500,000, Chase said. He said the number casually, as if he were asking to borrow $20 for pizza. For the seed round, we figured since you are sitting on all that Heliofort stock, you would want to invest in your brother's future. The table went silent. Forks paused halfway to mouths. My relatives looked back and forth between me and my father, sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure. $1,500,000. They were not asking for help with a bill. They were trying to harvest me. I placed my silverware down on my plate, aligning the knife and fork perfectly. I took a breath, letting the cool, analytical part of my brain take over. No, I said. The silence stretched, tight and brittle. Excuse me? Daniel asked, his brow furrowing. No, I repeated, my voice projecting clearly to the ends of the room. I will not give you $1,500,000. I will not give you $1,000. The answer is no. Victoria let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. Lena, don't be selfish. This is for the family. Your brother has worked so hard on this. Chase has never worked a hard day in his life, I said, meeting her gaze. And I am done being the bank for this family. The bank? Daniel spluttered, slamming his hand on the table. How dare you? We raised you. We put a roof over your head. I put the roof over your head. Dad! I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. The control I had maintained for a decade finally snapped. That slate roof? I paid $35,000 for it. The kitchen renovation Victoria is so proud of? $80,000, wired from my account. Your car leases, your country club dues, your medical bills. I have done the math. I looked around the room at my stunned relatives. In the last 10 years, I have transferred over $700,000 to Daniel and Victoria Carver, I stated, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. I have the bank statements to prove every cent, and I have never received a single dime back, not a thank you, not a birthday card, just demands for more. The room was dead silent. Uncle Robert's mouth was slightly open. Aunt Sarah looked down at her plate. Victoria's face transformed. The warm maternal mask melted away, revealing something cold and reptilian beneath. She stood up slowly. You are lying, she hissed. She is making it up. She is jealous of Chase. She always has been. Those were gifts. You gave that money freely because you wanted to support your aging father. That is called filial piety. Lena, trying to turn your generosity into a debt now? It is disgusting. It wasn't generosity, I said. It was extortion. You made me feel guilty for existing. Enough, Daniel roared. Into the kitchen, now. We are not doing this in front of guests. Victoria marched toward the kitchen, grabbing my arm as she passed. I shook her off but followed her. I wanted to end this. I wanted to say my piece and leave this house forever. We burst into the kitchen. The swinging door swung shut behind us, muffling the sounds of the dining room but not blocking them out completely. Chase followed us in, closing the door and leaning against it, crossing his arms. You ungrateful little bitch, Victoria spat, her voice low and venomous. After everything I did for you, I treated you like my own daughter. You treated me like an ATM, I countered. I am done. Victoria, I am not giving Chase a penny for his imaginary resort. It is real, Chase shouted, stepping forward. And you are going to ruin it because you are bitter that Dad loves me more. Chase, shut up, Victoria snapped. She turned back to me, opening a drawer near the refrigerator. She pulled out a document. It wasn't the resort pitch. It was a legal form. Fine, she said, her eyes hard. Forget the investment, but your father needs security. This is a temporary transfer of power of attorney over your secondary pension fund, just as collateral so Daniel can secure a loan from the bank. If you won't give us cash, sign this so we can use your assets as leverage. I looked at the paper. It was insanity. They wanted to leverage my retirement to fund a scam. Are you out of your minds? I asked. I am not signing that. You have to, Daniel said, his voice whining now. Lena, please, we are underwater. The house is leveraged to the hilt. If Chase doesn't get this funding, we lose everything. Then you lose everything, I said coldly. It is not my problem anymore. You owe us. Victoria stepped into my personal space, her perfume overpowering and cloying. You think you are so special with your high-rise apartment and your fancy job? You are nothing without the Carver name. Sign the paper. I looked at her, and suddenly, the text message I had received earlier flashed in my mind. Don't let them force you to sign. I am not signing, I said, and I think you should be very careful. Victoria, I received a message today from E. I watched the color drain from her face. Her pupils dilated. She whispered, Eleanor? She told me not to sign anything, I said, bluffing slightly about the extent of the communication, but hitting the mark. Maybe she knows what you are doing with the family trust. Maybe she knows why you are so desperate for cash. Victoria's fear turned instantly into violent rage. The mention of Eleanor was a trigger I hadn't anticipated. You lying little snake, she shrieked. She is senile. She doesn't talk to anyone. You are trying to scare me? I am telling you that I have protection, I said, stepping back. You have nothing, Victoria screamed. She lunged at me. She snatched the folder from the counter and threw it aside. Then her hand lashed out. Crack. The sound was sickeningly loud in the tiled kitchen. Her palm connected with my cheek with the force of a whip. My head snapped to the side. My ear rang with a high-pitched whine, and the taste of copper filled my mouth where my teeth had cut into my inner cheek. I stood there, stunned. I was 32 years old. I was a technical director. I managed millions of dollars in security contracts, and my stepmother had just slapped me across the face like a disobedient child. Mom, Chase said, sounding surprised but not moving to stop her. Shut up, Victoria yelled. She didn't stop. She grabbed the lapels of my expensive coat, her nails digging into the wool. She shoved me backward. I stumbled, my lower back slamming hard into the edge of the granite countertop, the same granite I had paid for. Pain shot up my spine. Victoria pressed her face close to mine. Her eyes were wide and manic. She shook me, her fingers digging into my shoulders. I fed you, she hissed, spittle landing on my cheek. I washed your clothes when your mother died. I put up with your sullen face for 20 years. I own you. Lena, I fed you, so I have the right to teach you. You do not walk away from this family until we say you are done. She shoved me again, pinning me against the counter. I was paralyzed by a mix of shock and humiliation. It wasn't the physical pain, though my cheek was burning hot. It was the degradation, the absolute realization that to them, I wasn't a person, I was an object, a resource to be mined until it was empty, and then crushed if it refused to yield. My father stood 3 feet away. He held his glass of wine. He looked at me, then looked away, studying the floor tiles. He was letting it happen. He was letting her assault me because he needed the money. Sign the paper, Victoria growled, grabbing my wrist and trying to force a pen into my hand. Sign it, or I swear to God I will ruin you. I will call your company. I will tell them you are unstable. I will tell them you stole from us." I struggled against her grip, gasping for air. "Let go of me!" "Not until you sign." From the corner of my eye, near the doorway to the mudroom, I saw a flash of movement. I turned my head slightly. It was my cousin's daughter, heavy-set and quiet, a teenager named Maya. She was standing in the shadows of the pantry door. She held her phone up. The camera lens pointed directly at us. Her hands were shaking violently, but the red recording light was steady. Victoria didn't see her. She was too focused on crushing my wrist. "You represent nothing," Victoria spat. "You are just a checkbook. Know your place." The ringing in my ear grew louder, drowning out her voice. I felt a cold, hard stone form in the center of my chest. The fear was evaporating, replaced by a clarity so sharp it hurt. I stopped struggling. I went completely still. Victoria, sensing the lack of resistance, paused. She pulled back slightly, looking triumphant. "Finally," she sneered. "Now, be a good girl and—" Ding-dong. The doorbell rang. It wasn't a polite, tentative ring. It was a long, continuous press, followed by 3 sharp blasts. It was the sound of an arrival that demanded attention. Victoria froze. Her hand was still gripping my collar. The silence in the kitchen was absolute. "Who is that?" Daniel asked, looking terrified. "We aren't expecting anyone else." I looked at Victoria. I saw the blood drain from her face for the second time that night. I touched my burning cheek, felt the swelling beginning to rise, and looked toward the front of the house. "I think," I whispered, my voice raspy but steady, "that is my ride." The silence that followed the doorbell was heavier than the violence that had preceded it. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Victoria's hand was still hovering in the air, her chest heaving with the exertion of assaulting me. My face throbbed, a hot, pulsing rhythm that synced with the shock radiating through my body. "Who is that?" Daniel whispered again, his voice cracking. He looked at the front door as if it were a portal to hell. Victoria smoothed her hair with a jerky, manic motion. She grabbed a dish towel, wiping her hands as if she could scrub away the evidence of what she had just done. "Get the door. Chase!" she snapped, her voice tight. "And if it is a solicitor, tell them we are calling the police." Chase, looking pale and stripped of his earlier bravado, shuffled out of the kitchen. I followed slowly, my legs feeling like lead. Victoria and Daniel trailed behind me, forming a grim procession back to the foyer. The guests in the dining room had gone quiet. They were craning their necks, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. They knew something had happened in the kitchen, the shout, the crash of the folder, but they were politely pretending to inspect their turkey. Chase unlocked the heavy oak front door and pulled it open. A gust of cold November wind swept into the hallway, carrying the scent of dead leaves and impending snow. But it was the figure standing on the threshold that sucked the oxygen out of the room. It was Eleanor Carver. My grandmother was supposed to be a ghost. According to the stories Daniel told, she was frail, senile, and living in a state of confused poverty in a nursing home 2 states away. We had been told she could barely feed herself, let alone travel. The woman standing in the doorway was none of those things. She was over 70, but she stood with the posture of a retired general. She wore a charcoal wool coat that fell to her ankles, tailored so perfectly it looked like armor. Underneath, I could see the collar of a silk blouse and a string of pearls that glowed with a luster that whispered of old money. She held a cane, black ebony with a silver handle, but she wasn't leaning on it. She was holding it like a scepter. Flanking her were 2 men. One was a young, sharp-eyed assistant in a navy suit, holding a briefcase. The other was a large, silent man with an earpiece, standing just outside the light of the porch, scanning the street. Chase took a step back, his mouth falling open. "Grandma?" Eleanor didn't look at him. She stepped across the threshold, her heels clicking sharply on the hardwood floor. The sound was deliberate. It was the sound of ownership. The dining room went deathly silent. A fork clattered onto a plate. I saw Aunt Sarah gasp and cover her mouth. The rumors about Eleanor selling her assets and losing her mind evaporated in a single second. This woman radiated power. Eleanor's eyes, a piercing, icy blue that I remembered from my childhood, swept the room. It was a tactical scan. She looked at the expensive floral arrangements. She looked at the crystal chandelier. She looked at the terrified faces of the relatives. Then her gaze landed on me. I wanted to hide. I felt shame burn through me. Here I was, a 32-year-old executive, standing in my father's hallway with a red handprint blooming on my cheek and blood trickling from a cut on my lip. Eleanor didn't flinch. Her eyes narrowed, zeroing in on the bruise. She looked at the slight tremor in my hands. Then, her gaze shifted to Victoria. She looked at Victoria's clenched fists, at the way she was breathing, at the flushed, guilty panic rising in her neck. It took her less than 5 seconds to reconstruct the entire crime scene. "Mother," Daniel stammered, stepping forward with a smile that looked like a grimace of pain. We weren't expecting you. You didn't RSVP." Eleanor turned her head slowly to look at her son. The look she gave him was one of profound, weary disappointment. "Thanksgiving is not a shareholder meeting, Daniel," she said. Her voice was not the cracked, weak voice of an invalid. It was clear, low, and cutting. "Family does not need an RSVP, although, judging by the reception, I see I have interrupted a performance." Victoria, ever the actress, realized the danger instantly. She plastered a smile on her face that was terrified at the edges and rushed forward, arms outstretched. "Mother Carver," she exclaimed, her voice pitching high and sweet. "What a wonderful surprise. We were just saying how much we missed you. Oh, let me take your coat. You must be frozen. Come in. Everyone, look who is here." Victoria reached out to touch Eleanor's arm, a gesture of fake intimacy meant to signal to the room that everything was normal. Eleanor didn't move away, but she shifted the angle of her cane slightly, creating a barrier between them. She didn't say a word. She just looked at Victoria's hand until Victoria, flushing a deep crimson, slowly pulled it back. "I will keep my coat for a moment," Eleanor said coolly. "The air in here seems quite stifling." She walked past them, straight toward me. The room watched, mesmerized. I stood frozen near the staircase. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would crack my ribs. Eleanor stopped in front of me, up close. I could see the lines of age on her face, but they looked like etched marble rather than withered skin. She smelled of lavender and steel. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a handkerchief. It was pure silk, embroidered with her initials. Without a word, she reached up. Her hand, spotted with age but steady as a surgeon's, touched my chin. She tilted my face to the light. I flinched instinctively. "Easy," she whispered. She dabbed the corner of my mouth, wiping away the smear of blood where my tooth had cut my lip. She looked at the red mark on my cheek, her eyes darkening with a frightening intensity. "Lena," she said softly, so only I could hear. "When was the last time you let them hit you?" The question hit me harder than the slap. "Let them—" I choked on the words. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, hot and stinging. "I didn't." "Hush," she said. She tucked the stained handkerchief into my hand and closed my fingers around it. "Keep this. It is evidence, and we are done with being victims today." She turned back to the room, her face composing itself into a mask of polite curiosity. "Well," Eleanor announced, tapping her cane once on the floor, "I believe I smell turkey. Is there a place for your mother, Daniel? Or has my seat been sold to the highest bidder?" No, of course not." Daniel scrambled, sweating profusely. "Chase, get a chair. Move over. Put Grandma at the head of the table." "No," Eleanor said. "I will sit next to Lena." The shuffling of chairs was chaotic. Guests moved aside quickly, eager to avoid being in the line of fire. I sat down, my hands still shaking, clutching the silk handkerchief. Eleanor sat beside me. her assistant taking a standing position near the wall, blending into the shadows like a piece of expensive furniture. The dinner resumed, but the mood had shifted entirely. The air was thick with tension. The relatives who had been whispering about Eleanor's poverty were now staring at her diamond earrings, clearly reassessing their alliances. Victoria sat across from us, unable to eat. She kept glancing at the kitchen door, as if checking an escape route. Daniel was drinking his wine too fast, his eyes darting between his mother and his wife. Eleanor unfolded her napkin with precise, elegant movements. She took a small bite of stuffing, chewed slowly, and then turned to Daniel. "The house looks different," she observed. Her tone was conversational, but I could hear the trap snapping shut. "The roof. It is new slate, isn't it?"
"Yes," Daniel said eagerly, thinking this was a safe topic. "Yes, we had to replace it last spring. Terrible leaks. Cost a fortune. But you have to protect the asset."
"Indeed," Eleanor said. "Slate is expensive, $35,000, give or take. Did the dividends from your tech portfolio cover that, Daniel?" Daniel choked on his wine. He coughed, his face turning purple. Well, the market has been volatile. Mother, we moved some things around." "I see," Eleanor said. She didn't look at him. She looked at the centerpiece. "And the kitchen, marble countertops, very lavish. Victoria, did your catering business finally take off?" Victoria stiffened. She didn't have a catering business. She had a lifestyle brand blog that had 300 followers and generated zero revenue. I have been doing some consulting," Victoria lied, her voice thin. "And Daniel and I manage our finances together. We prioritize our home." "Prioritize," Eleanor repeated the word, tasting it. "Interesting word. Chase, how is your venture? What was it? Selling virtual land?" Chase sat up, trying to regain some ground. "It is the metaverse. Grandma, it is the future. I am actually closing a seed round for $1.5 million soon." "Is that so?" Eleanor asked. She turned to look at him, her expression unreadable. "And who is the lead investor? Or were you planning to secure that funding from a family member's retirement fund?" The silence that fell over the table was absolute. You could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Victoria dropped her fork. It clattered loudly against the china. "I don't know what you mean," Chase muttered, looking down at his plate. "Don't you?" Eleanor asked pleasantly. "That is strange. Because my lawyers in Manhattan received a flag just last week. It seems someone was trying to draft a power of attorney document using a template that looked very amateur. It referenced assets that didn't belong to the applicant." She took a sip of water, letting the words hang in the air like a guillotine blade. "Of course," she continued. "My legal team blocked it. They trace everything. It is amazing what digital footprints people leave when they are desperate. IP addresses, timestamps. They tell such a vivid story." I watched Daniel. He was pale, sweat beading on his upper lip. He knew. He knew exactly what she was talking about. They had tried to access her accounts, or maybe mine, using my identity to get to her. The web of lies was so tangled I couldn't see the ends, but Eleanor evidently could. The relatives were exchanging looks. Aunt Sarah was whispering furiously to Uncle Robert. The pieces were clicking into place. The rich carvers were broke. The renovations were funded by someone else, and the senile matriarch was sharper than all of them combined. "But let us not talk about business," Eleanor said, smiling a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It is Thanksgiving. Lena, tell me about Denver. I hear your company just secured a contract with the Department of Defense. That must be a very high clearance position." "It is," I said, finding my voice. "I manage the cybersecurity protocols for their logistics division." "Impressive," Eleanor said. "A job that requires absolute integrity and financial transparency. I imagine if someone were to, say, forge your signature on a loan document, it could jeopardize your security clearance. It would be a federal crime, wouldn't it?" "Yes," I said, looking directly at Victoria. "It would be a felony, punishable by up to 10 years in prison." Victoria flinched as if I had slapped her. 10 years, Eleanor mused. That is a long time to be away from such a beautiful kitchen. The rest of the meal passed in a blur of agonizing tension. No one spoke above a whisper. The only sound was Eleanor's calm voice asking precise, devastating questions about interest rates, property taxes, and investment returns, forcing Daniel and Victoria to lie again and again until their stories began to contradict each other. When the dessert was cleared, pumpkin pie that tasted like ash in my mouth, Eleanor placed her napkin on the table. The meal was delicious. Victoria, she said, although I believe the seasoning was a bit rich. She stood up, signaling the end of the torture. Lena, she said, help me to the back porch. I need some fresh air. My old lungs find the air in here a bit toxic. Of course, I said, standing up immediately. Mother, Daniel said, standing up too, desperation in his eyes. We should talk, privately. There are things you need to understand about our situation. I understand perfectly. Daniel, Eleanor said without looking back. I understand that you have mistaken silence for ignorance. We will talk, but not now. Now, I am going to speak with my granddaughter. She took my arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong. We walked through the kitchen, past the spot where I had been shoved against the counter less than an hour ago. I saw the ghost of myself standing there, terrified and small, but walking next to Eleanor, hearing the rhythmic tap of her cane. I didn't feel small anymore. We stepped out onto the back porch. It was a sprawling deck made of expensive composite wood, $12,000, overlooking a manicured lawn. The night was cold, but the fresh air felt like a baptism. Eleanor let go of my arm. She walked to the railing and looked out at the darkness. Inside, through the large glass sliding doors, I could see Victoria and Daniel. They were standing in the kitchen, arguing. Victoria was waving her hands frantically. Daniel had his head in his hands. They looked like rats on a sinking ship. They are terrified, Eleanor said quietly. They should be, I replied, the anger finally finding a voice that didn't shake. Eleanor turned to me. In the moonlight, she looked formidable. I didn't come here for the turkey, Lena, she said. And I didn't come here just to scare them. I came because I have been watching you bleed for this family for 10 years, and today, I decided the bleeding stops. She reached into her coat pocket again. This time, she didn't pull out a handkerchief. She pulled out a thick envelope. Inside, she said, is the truth, not the story they tell the neighbors, the real numbers, and frankly, my dear, it is much worse than you think. I looked at the envelope, then back at the woman I thought I knew. Why now? I asked. Why did you wait? Because, Eleanor said, her eyes hard as diamonds, a sword is useless until the soldier is ready to pick it up, and after that slap in the kitchen, I think you are finally ready to go to war. I took the envelope. It felt heavy. It felt like a weapon. I am ready, I said. Good, Eleanor smiled, and for the first time, it was genuine. Because by Christmas, we are going to take everything they have. The heavy glass door slid shut behind us, sealing away the warmth and the toxic tension of the dining room. The air on the back porch was biting, sharp with the scent of coming snow and cured firewood. It was the kind of cold that woke you up, stripping away the fog of wine and politeness. I walked to the railing, gripping the cold composite wood, synthetic teak that had cost me $12,000 3 summers ago, because Victoria claimed the old cedar gave her splinters. I looked out at the dark, manicured lawn, my breath pluming in front of me. Behind me, I heard a sound that made me turn around. It was a soft thud, followed by the click of heels. Eleanor had leaned her ebony cane against the siding of the house. She stepped away from it. She didn't stumble. She didn't shake. She straightened her spine, her shoulders rolling back, and suddenly she wasn't the 70-something grandmother who needed assistance walking. She was 6 feet of steel and elegance. The frailty was a costume, and she had just taken it off. You can walk, I said, the realization landing heavy in my stomach. I can run if I have to, Eleanor said. her voice stripping away the slight tremble she had used inside. It was a strong baritone voice now, commanding and crisp, but people tell you so much more when they think you are too weak to listen. She walked over to one of the patio chairs, part of a set I had bought for Daniel's 60th birthday, and sat down, crossing her legs with a grace that defied her age. She gestured to the seat opposite her. "Sit, Lena. We have work to do, and I am done with the theatrical portion of the evening." I sat. The envelope she had given me was resting on my lap. It felt heavy, radioactive. "Tell me," Eleanor said, her blue eyes locking onto mine. "And I want the truth. Lena, no protecting them, no saving face. How much?" "How much what?" I asked, though I knew. "How much have you poured into this bottomless pit of a house?" She pulled a small, leather-bound notebook and a gold fountain pen from her coat pocket. She opened it to a fresh page, the paper crisp and white. "I want numbers, specifics." I looked at her pen, hovering over the paper. I had spent 10 years hiding this. I had spent a decade pretending that I was just a dutiful daughter, that my father was just having a run of bad luck, that Victoria meant well. Speaking the truth felt like a betrayal. But then I touched my cheek. It was throbbing where Victoria's ring had caught the skin. "The mortgage," I started, my voice quiet. "I took over the payments 5 years ago. Daniel said the bank was threatening foreclosure. That is roughly $4,200 a month." Eleanor wrote it down. Scratch, scratch. "Go on." "The renovation," I continued. "The dam breaking. The kitchen was $80,000. The roof was $35,000. The landscaping is $600 a month. I pay the insurance on both cars. I paid off Daniel's credit card debt twice. Once in 2018 for $42,000, and again last year for $28,000. "Medical?" Eleanor asked without looking up. "Victoria's cosmetic surgeries," I said, feeling the bitterness coat my tongue. "She calls them medical necessities. Deviated septum, back problems. I paid the surgeon directly. That was another $50,000 over 3 years. I took a deep breath. "And then there are the loans, cash transfers, for Chase's businesses, for Daniel's investment seed money. I have transferred. I think the total is close to $750,000 in cash over the last decade. If you include the mortgage and the bills, it is over $1 million. Eleanor didn't gasp. She didn't look shocked. She simply finished writing, dotted a period at the end of a sentence, and capped her pen. $1,042,600. She calculated instantly, her mind working faster than a spreadsheet. That matches my forensic accountant's estimate almost to the dollar. I stared at her. "You knew?" "I suspected," Eleanor corrected. "There is a difference. I knew Daniel was incompetent. I knew Victoria was a leech. But I needed to know if you were a victim or a participant." "A participant?" I asked, offended. "You thought I was helping them?" "Wealth does strange things to families, Lena," she said, her face softening slightly. "I have seen children help their parents hide assets to avoid taxes. I have seen grandchildren launder money through shell companies. I had to be sure you were the one bleeding, not the one holding the knife." "I am definitely bleeding," I muttered, touching my lip. "Yes," Eleanor said, her eyes darkening. "You are—" She leaned back, looking at the dark windows of the house. "They think I am destitute. You know, that is the rumor Victoria planted, that I lost the Carver fortune in the crash of 2008, and that I am rotting away in a state-funded facility." "Are you?" I asked, terrified of the answer. If she was broke, then we were both alone. Eleanor let out a dry, sharp laugh. "My dear, I am the silent chairman of the Carver Meridian Group. We hold assets in commercial real estate, pharmaceuticals, and defense contracting. My personal net worth is north of $2 billion. I didn't lose the fortune. I hid it." My mouth fell open. $2 billion. The woman sitting in front of me, who my father described as a burden, could buy this entire town without checking her bank balance. "I hid it from Daniel," she continued, her voice hard. Because I saw who he was becoming. I saw who he married. Victoria. She has the appetite of a locust. If she knew what I was really worth, I would have been dead 10 years ago, and she would be wearing my jewelry at your funeral. She reached out and tapped the envelope on my lap. That is why I sent you the text, she said. The message from E. How did you get my number? I asked. I haven't spoken to you since Grandpa died. I have a very capable team, she said. When you work at my level, privacy is a myth. I had a digital security specialist find you. We have been monitoring the chatter from Daniel's IP address for 6 months. We flagged it when they started searching for legal templates. Templates for what? I asked, my fingers trembling as I opened the clasp of the envelope. Open it, she commanded. I slid the thick stack of papers out. The porch light was dim, but it was bright enough to read the bold headings. The first document was a power of attorney, general durable power of attorney. It granted Daniel Carver full control over the assets, bank accounts, and real estate holdings of Lena Carver. I flipped to the last page. There, at the bottom, was a signature. Lena Carver. It looked like my signature. It had the same loop on the L, the same sharp slant to the right. But as a cybersecurity expert, I knew how to look for artifacts. The pressure was uneven. The strokes were hesitant. It was a forgery, and not a digital one. Someone had practiced this. Chase, I whispered. He used to trace comics when we were kids. He has a good hand for copying. Keep looking, Eleanor said, her voice grim. I turned the page. The next document made my blood freeze in my veins. Advanced Medical Directive and Healthcare Proxy. It designated Victoria Carver as my sole medical decision-maker in the event of my incapacitation. It gave her the power to commit me to a psychiatric facility. It gave her the power to cease life support. They were going to declare you unstable, Eleanor explained, her voice devoid of emotion but heavy with implication. Victoria has been seeding the narrative for years, telling relatives you are stressed, overworked, manic, rigid, she called you tonight, hard to connect with. If you refuse to give them the money for this resort, well, a breakdown would be very convenient. A court-appointed guardian controls the checkbook. Lena. I felt sick, violently sick. I looked at the date on the medical proxy. It was dated 3 days ago. They were planning this, I said, my voice shaking. They weren't just asking for money tonight. They were setting a trap. They were going to corner you, Eleanor said. If you signed the loan, fine. They drain you dry. If you refused, they use the forgery. They claim you signed it during a mental episode. They claim you need help. They lock you away and liquidate your Heliofort stock while you are sedated. She leaned forward, her eyes burning into mine. I saw the draft come through a law firm I have a retainer with, she said. They were foolish enough to use a template from a firm that Carver Meridian owns. It flagged in our system immediately. That is when I knew I couldn't just watch anymore. I had to intervene. I looked at the papers, the physical proof that my family didn't just see me as an ATM. They saw me as a disposable object. They were willing to erase my existence, my sanity, my freedom, just to keep their country club membership. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I asked, tears finally spilling over. Why did you let me pay for everything for 10 years? Because you wouldn't have believed me, Eleanor said gently. You were programmed. Lena, Daniel spent 30 years installing guilt buttons in your psyche. If I had called you a year ago and told you your father was a monster, you would have defended him. You would have said, he is just bad with money. You had to see it. You had to feel the slap. You had to see the signature. She pointed to the red mark on my face. That slap was the final piece of evidence, she said. It proves you are under duress. It proves abuse. It proves you are not a co-conspirator in their fraud. She took a deep breath and squared her shoulders. So, here is the question, Eleanor said. You are standing at a crossroads. Lena, you can go back inside, make peace, maybe give them a little money to keep the peace, and try to be the good daughter they want. You can spend the next 20 years buying their love until you are empty. She paused. letting the cold wind whistle between us.
Or, she said, you can decide that you are done. You can decide to take back your life. But if you choose that path, it is not just about walking away. It is about destroying the machinery they built to crush you.
I looked at the medical proxy in my hand. I looked at the forgery of my name, my identity, stolen by my brother. I thought about the $700,000. I thought about the years of missed holidays, the 80-hour work weeks I endured to pay for their wine, the way Victoria looked at me with pure contempt while wearing clothes I bought. Something inside me broke, but it wasn't a breaking down. It was a breaking open, the guilt, the obligation, the desperate need for Daddy's approval. It all shattered, and underneath was something cold, hard, and incredibly sharp. I looked up at my grandmother. "I don't want to just walk away," I said. My voice was steady. It sounded like the voice I used in boardrooms when I was firing a negligent employee. "I want them to stop. I want them to hurt the way I hurt. I want them to lose every single thing they stole from me. I want it to be permanent." Eleanor studied my face. She looked at the fire in my eyes, and slowly, a smile spread across her face. It wasn't a nice smile. It was a smile of recognition, a wolf recognizing another wolf. "I was hoping you would say that," she said. She reached into the inner pocket of her blazer and pulled out a small, silver key. She placed it on the table between us. 10 years ago," Eleanor said, "when I realized Daniel was beyond saving, I made a decision. I created a blind trust. I moved the controlling interest of Carver Meridian Group, 51% of the voting stock, into it." She tapped the key. "The trust has a single beneficiary," she said. "You?" I stared at the key. "Me? But you weren't even talking to me." "I was protecting you," she said. "The trust had a clause, the non-complicity clause. You could only inherit the control if you could prove, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that you were not involved in your father's financial schemes, that you were a victim of his manipulation, not a partner in it." She gestured to the kitchen door, where the scene of the assault had taken place. "Tonight," she said, "when Victoria struck you in front of witnesses, and when they presented you with fraudulent documents you refused to sign, the conditions were met. The trust activates the moment we file the police report for the assault." I couldn't breathe. 51%. She was handing me a billion-dollar empire. She was handing me the weapon I needed not just to fight back, but to nuke them from orbit. "You own it, Lena," Eleanor said softly. "You don't just own your apartment in Denver. You own the bank that holds the mortgage on this house. You own the firm that insures Chase's car. You own the world they are trying so desperately to pretend they belong to." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "So," she said, "now that you know you are the boss, how do you want to handle your employees?" I picked up the key. It was cold metal, but it warmed quickly in my hand. I looked through the glass doors at Daniel and Victoria. They were still arguing, oblivious to the fact that the ground beneath them had already ceased to exist. "I want to ruin them," I said, "systematically, legally, and publicly." Eleanor nodded, picking up her cane. "Excellent," she said, standing up. "Then wipe your face, my dear. We have a dinner to finish, and you need to act like a terrified victim for exactly 1 more hour. Can you do that?" I stood up beside her. I touched the stinging skin of my cheek one last time, then lowered my hand. "I am a Carver," I said. "I can act." "That is my girl," Eleanor said. "Now, let's go inside. I believe it is time for dessert." The last of the guests finally filtered out around 9 o'clock in the evening. The exodus was awkward, filled with mumbled apologies and hasty retreats. Nobody wanted to linger in a house where the air felt charged with static electricity. Victoria played the hostess until the bitter end, standing at the door with a smile that looked like it had been stapled onto her face, waving goodbye to people who were undoubtedly texting each other about the slap heard around the world before they even started their cars. When the door finally clicked shut, the silence that descended was heavy. "I am exhausted," Eleanor announced, leaning heavily on her cane in the foyer. She looked frail again. A sudden transformation that would have won an Academy Award. Daniel, I simply cannot face the drive back to the city tonight. The roads are icing over. I will need the guest suite. Victoria stiffened. I saw panic flare in her eyes. The last thing she wanted was the enemy sleeping under her roof. Mother Carver, we would love to have you, Victoria said, her voice tight. But the guest room isn't really prepared. It is fine, I interrupted. I bought the linens for that room myself. Egyptian cotton, thread count of 600. I know exactly where they are. Victoria shot me a look of pure venom, but Daniel, looking like a man walking to the gallows, nodded quickly. Of course. Mother, stay as long as you like. Lena, help your grandmother up. I took Eleanor's rolling suitcase, a vintage Louis Vuitton that looked battered but indestructible, and we ascended the stairs. The house was quiet, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the quiet of a predator holding its breath. Once we were inside the guest room and I had locked the door, the performance dropped instantly. Eleanor abandoned the cane against the vanity. She walked over to the window, peeked through the blinds to check the driveway, and then turned to me. Open the suitcase, Lena, she commanded. I hoisted the bag onto the bed. It was surprisingly heavy. I expected clothes, toiletries, maybe a book. What I found instead made me stare. Nestled between layers of silk blouses and cashmere cardigans was a matte black laptop with no branding, a series of encrypted hard drives, and thick manila folders labeled with alphanumeric codes. This wasn't a grandmother's overnight bag. This was a mobile command center. My team prepared this before I left New York, Eleanor said, sitting on the edge of the bed. This laptop has a satellite uplink, completely independent of your father's Wi-Fi, which I assume Chase has compromised with his incompetence. You brought a burner laptop to Thanksgiving? I asked, impressed despite myself. I brought a weapon, she corrected. She booted up the machine. The screen glowed with a harsh blue light, prompting a biometric scan. She swiped her finger, and lines of code cascaded down the screen. Sit down, Lena. We have a long night ahead of us. I pulled up the desk chair. For the next hour, the room felt less like a bedroom and more like a war room in a spy thriller. Here is the reality, Eleanor said, handing me one of the hard drives. I need you to marry your skills with my data. I have the financial records from the Carver Meridian side, the withdrawals, the trust fund allocations, the dividend payouts, but I cannot see where the money goes once it hits Daniel's accounts. That is where you come in. You want me to hack my father? I asked. I want you to audit him, she said sharply. You are a cybersecurity expert. You know how to trace digital footprints. Chase is lazy. He uses the same passwords for everything, doesn't he? Variations of his birthday and the word Bitcoin, I admitted. It is pathetic security hygiene. Good. Crack it. I want to know every shell company, every offshore account, and every crypto wallet he has set up. We split the labor. I connected the drive to my own secure tablet, bypassing the house network entirely, while Eleanor made notes on legal strategies, reviewing bylaws for the Carver Meridian Board. I went hunting. It didn't take long. Chase left a digital trail like a wounded elephant. I found emails confirming the setup of Maple Crest Holdings and Silverline Retreats LLC. They looked like legitimate real estate ventures on the surface, but the metadata was damning. The registered agent for both was a PMO box in a strip mall in Nevada, and the CEO listed was a man who, upon a quick background check, turned out to be Chase's college roommate who was currently working as a bartender in Austin. But the real shock came when I cross-referenced the dates. Grandma, I said, pausing as I looked at a spreadsheet. Look at this. Eleanor leaned over my shoulder. 2 years ago, I said, pointing to a series of dates. Daniel claimed the market crashed and his portfolio lost 40% of its value. He called me crying, saying he couldn't pay the property taxes or the insurance on the house. I transferred him $55,000 that week. Eleanor nodded grimly. I remember that week. But look at the market data, I said. The market was up. His portfolio should have been healthy. It was, Eleanor said. She walked back to her bed and picked up a file. He didn't lose the money. Lena, I cut him off. I froze. What? 2 years ago, I noticed irregularities, Eleanor explained. Large cash withdrawals, 50,000 here, 100,000 there, no receipts, no explanations. I restricted his access to the family dividends. I put him on a fixed allowance, a generous one, mind you, $15,000 a month, but apparently not enough for Victoria's tastes. The realization hit me like a physical blow. So when he told me he was broke, I started, my voice shaking. He was broke because I stopped the flow, Eleanor finished. And instead of cutting back on his lifestyle, instead of telling Victoria no, he turned to his secondary revenue stream. Me, I whispered. You, she confirmed. The numbers match almost perfectly. Every time I tightened the leash, he called you with a new emergency, the roof, the medical bills, the bad investments. He wasn't investing. Lena, he was just maintaining a standard of living he hadn't earned, and he was using your salary to replace my handouts. I felt a cold, hard rage settle in my chest. It wasn't just greed. It was a transfer of parasitism. When the host body of Eleanor Carver became too difficult to feed on, they had simply attached themselves to me. Eleanor watched me process this. She reached into her folder and pulled out a document on heavy, cream-colored paper. It was bound with a blue ribbon. "Do you know what this is?" she asked. "A will?" I guessed. "Daniel's favorite bedtime story," she said. "This is the draft of my last will and testament from 5 years ago. In this version, Daniel inherits the bulk of the estate, to be held in trust for Chase and you, but mostly Daniel." She held it up. "He thinks this is still the active document. Victoria has practically memorized the page numbers. She is counting the days until I die so she can cash this ticket." With a sudden, violent motion, Eleanor ripped the document in half. The sound of tearing paper was loud in the quiet room. She didn't stop there. She tore it again and again, shredding the heavy bond paper until it was nothing but confetti on the duvet. "It is bait," she declared, brushing the scraps off her lap. "I wrote a new will 3 years ago. They get nothing. But as long as they think this version exists, they will try to keep me alive just long enough to secure it, or they will try to have me declared incompetent so they can execute the power of attorney." She opened her laptop and turned the screen toward me. "Read this," she said. It was an email chain. The sender was Victoria Carver. The recipient was a lawyer named oddly enough. Samuel H. Thorne. The subject line was, "Guardianship Procedures, Accelerated Timeline." I read the text. Samuel. Regarding the EC situation, her behavior is becoming increasingly erratic. We are concerned about her ability to manage the estate. If we need to move forward with the emergency guardianship filing, what medical documentation do we need? We have a doctor willing to attest to cognitive decline. We need to secure the assets before she makes any foolish donations. "She is trying to lock you up," I said, looking up at Eleanor. The horror of it was chilling. "She wants to declare you mentally unfit so Daniel can take control of the money." "Exactly," Eleanor said calmly, "and she was planning to do the exact same thing to you. That is why they needed that medical proxy you refused to sign tonight. If they control both of us, they control the entire board." She closed the laptop. "We have the what and the how," Eleanor said. "Now we need the confession. We need them to say it out loud, on tape, where a judge cannot dismiss it as hearsay." She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a thin file. "But first," she said, sliding a document across the duvet toward me, "I need you to sign this." I looked at the header. Non-disclosure agreement and immunity deal. Internal audit. Carver Meridian Group. "What is this?" I asked. "Protection," Eleanor said seriously. "If this blows up, and it will, there will be a forensic investigation by the SEC and the IRS. Technically, your money has been commingled with their laundered funds. A prosecutor could argue you were knowingly funding their illegal activities." She tapped the paper. "This document designates you as a confidential informant and a contracted auditor for the firm, effective retroactively. It proves you were investigating, not participating, It shields you from liability when the police eventually come for your father. I looked at her. She had thought of everything. She wasn't just protecting her money. She was building a fortress around me. I took the pen she offered and signed my name. For the first time in my life, signing a paper for my family didn't feel like giving something away. It felt like putting on armor. "Good," Eleanor said, tucking the document away. "Now, here is the plan. We do not confront them tomorrow at breakfast. That is too messy, and they will just deny. 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 We need to catch them in the act of coercion." "How?" I asked. "I am going to invite them to a reconciliation lunch," Eleanor said, a wicked glint in her eye. "Next weekend, at my estate in Ravenwood Hill. I will tell Daniel that I feel guilty about causing a scene. I will tell him I'm ready to discuss transitioning the assets to him because I am just too old and tired to fight." "He will bite," I said. "He is desperate." "He will swallow the hook whole," Eleanor corrected. "And Victoria will come prepared to close the deal. We will hold the lunch in the sunroom. I will have my security team wire the place for sound and video. High definition. Every word they say, every threat they make, every lie they tell will be recorded." She looked at me intently. "Your job, Lena, is the hardest part. You have to be the bait. I need you to come to that lunch and act like you are wavering, act like you are scared, act like the girl who just wants her daddy to love her." "I can do that," I said, though the thought made my stomach turn. "And when they start to pressure you," Eleanor said, leaning in close, "when Victoria starts her gaslighting, when Chase starts his guilt-tripping, do not stop them. Do not argue. Let them speak. Silence is a weapon. Lena, the more you stay quiet, the more they will fill the silence with their own crimes. People who think they are smarter than you always talk too much. We will let them hang themselves with their own arrogance." I sat back in the chair, looking at the shredded remains of the will on the bedspread. I thought about the email Victoria had sent. I thought about the years of manipulation. For the first time, I didn't feel like the daughter who wasn't good enough. I didn't feel like the walking ATM, the walking safe. I felt like a CEO. I felt like a partner. "We catch them on tape," I said, my mind racing through the logistics. "We match the tape with the bank records I found tonight. We match the IP addresses from Chase's logins. And then?" "And then," Eleanor said, standing up to turn off the bedside lamp, "we drop the hammer. We give the evidence to the board, the bank, and the district attorney, in that order." The room plunged into semi-darkness, illuminated only by the moonlight filtering through the blinds. "Get some sleep, Lena," Eleanor said from the darkness. "You have a big role to play. Tomorrow morning, you are going to go downstairs, apologize to Victoria for causing a scene, and tell her you will think about the loan. Give them hope. Hope is what will make them careless." I stood up and walked to the door. My hand hovered over the knob. "Grandma?" I whispered. "Yes?" "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," she replied, her voice dry and amused. "Wait until you see the look on Victoria's face when the handcuffs go on. That will be all the thanks I need." I slipped out into the hallway. The house was silent, breathing slowly around me. I walked past my father's bedroom door. I could hear the faint sound of the television and Victoria's muffled voice. They were probably plotting their next move, confident that they still held the cards. I walked to my own room, lying down on the bed I had paid for, staring at the ceiling I had repaired. I closed my eyes, but I didn't sleep. I rehearsed. I rehearsed the fear I would fake. I rehearsed the hesitation. I rehearsed the submission. I was a carver, after all, and it turned out the women in this family were very, very good at playing the long game. The only difference was, Victoria was playing for money. Eleanor and I were playing for blood. Back in Denver, the air was thin and crisp, smelling of snow and city exhaust. It was a sharp contrast to the suffocating perfume and roasting turkey of Lakewood Heights. I sat in my office at Helio Fort Cyber Defense, the glass walls overlooking the sprawling city lights. Here, I wasn't the daughter who couldn't do anything right. Here, I was the predator. I had brought the encrypted hard drive Eleanor gave me, along with copies of every document I could smuggle out of the house. My workspace was a fortress of monitors. On the left screen, I had the raw bank data from the joint account I had fed for a decade. On the right, I had the proprietary forensic software we used to track state-sponsored hackers. It felt almost unfair to use military-grade tools on my stepmother. But then I remembered the sound of her hand connecting with my face, and the guilt vanished. I started with the investments. For years, Victoria had claimed she was managing a diverse portfolio. Daniel often bragged about her market savvy. I pulled up the transfer logs. There were regular monthly outflows, varying between $5,000 and $12,000, sent to entities with reassuringly boring names: Maple Crest Holdings and Silverline Retreats, LLC. To the untrained eye, these looked like property management firms or boutique investment funds. I ran a deep search on the business registries. Maple Crest Holdings was incorporated in Delaware 3 years ago. I traced the registered agent. It was a computerized service. I dug deeper, following the money trail through the clearinghouses. The funds didn't go into stocks or bonds. They flowed into a corporate account, sat for 48 hours, and were then transferred to a personal checking account at a regional bank in Arizona. I accessed the metadata of the account holder. The name on the account was not a company. It was Victoria Carver. I pulled up the transaction history for this holding company. It was a catalog of vanity: Neiman Marcus, a plastic surgery clinic in Scottsdale, a luxury car lease for a Porsche Macan that I had never seen in the driveway. She must keep it in storage or use it for her consulting trips. Then I looked at Silverline Retreats, LLC. This one was sloppier. The incorporation documents listed a PEO box that I recognized. It was the same PEO box Chase used for his metaverse startup. I followed the money: $10,000 wired in January, $15,000 in March. And where did it go? Not to developers, not to coders. It went to DraftKings, crypto exchanges with terrible reputations, and a series of payments to a reputation management firm, likely someone Chase hired to scrub his failed ventures from the internet. They weren't investing my money, they were eating it. I needed a second pair of eyes, someone who could verify the digital footprints without asking why I was investigating people with my last name. I called Marcus, a senior analyst on my team. He was a man who lived in code and spoke in riddles, the most trustworthy person I knew. "I need a consult," I said when he walked into my office, closing the glass door and engaging the soundproofing. "Personal matter, hypothetical scenario. I have a client who suspects familial fraud. I need to link an IP address to an unauthorized access attempt." Marcus didn't blink. He sat down, cracking his knuckles. "Give me the logs." I pushed the data Eleanor had provided, the security logs from her bank and her personal email server. "The target tried to reset the password for a high-value banking portal," I explained, pointing to the timestamps. 3 attempts, failed the security questions, then they tried to access the email recovery account. Marcus typed furiously, his eyes darting across the waterfalls of code. "Amateur hour," he muttered. "They didn't even use a VPN. They are routing directly through a residential ISP in Lakewood Heights. Comcast connection." He pulled up the geolocation. It pinpointed a house on Elm Street. My father's house. "Can you get the device ID?" I asked. "Easy," Marcus said. "MacBook Pro. Registered to user. Seaman Enterprises. Chase." My brother hadn't just asked for money. He had sat in his bedroom, using the Wi-Fi I paid for, and tried to hack into our grandmother's bank account. That wasn't just a family dispute. That was a federal crime: wire fraud, attempted grand larceny, violating the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. "Thanks, Marcus," I said, my voice cold. "Forget you saw this." "Saw what?" he said, standing up. "I was just helping you debug a printer." He left, and I sat there staring at the screen. I had them. I had the theft. I had the cybercrime. But Eleanor was working on the other side of the pincer movement. My phone buzzed. It was an encrypted message from Eleanor. "Harriet is drafting the freeze orders. We have hit a snag. I called her immediately.
What snag? I asked, skipping the pleasantries.
Harriet is getting sentimental. Eleanor's voice came through, sharp and clear. She is worried about Daniel. She says that legally, since his name is on the joint accounts with Victoria. Freezing them implicates him as a co-conspirator. She wants to offer him a separate immunity deal before we drop the hammer.
And what did you say? I asked, gripping the phone.
I told her absolutely not, Eleanor said. I told her that Daniel is a grown man who has been signing his name next to Victoria's for 20 years. He watched his wife strike you and did nothing. He chose his bed. Now he has to lie in it while the police strip the sheets.
If we freeze the accounts, I reasoned, thinking like a strategist,
they will know immediately. The cards will decline. They will panic.
That is the point, Eleanor said, but we are not executing the order yet. Harriet has the paperwork signed and ready for a judge. We hold it until the lunch, until we get the confession.
I found something else, I said, hesitating. This was the part that scared me. Grandma, I was looking at the Carver Meridian Charity Fund, the Veterans Housing Initiative.
Yes? Eleanor's voice softened slightly. That fund was her pride and joy.
There was a transfer 6 months ago, I said. $250,000. It was flagged as consulting fees for a vendor called Atlas Logistics.
Atlas Logistics is a legitimate supply chain partner, Eleanor said.
The real one is, I corrected. But this payment went to a clone site, Atlas Logistics Solutions, Inc. The routing number goes to a shell company in the Cayman Islands.
Who controls the shell? Eleanor asked, her voice dropping to a whisper.
Chase, I said. But he is too stupid to set up a Cayman shell. He had help. The incorporation documents list a secondary signatory.
I took a breath. Daniel Carver.
Silence stretched on the line. This changed everything. Embezzling from me was one thing. Embezzling from a registered 501c3 charity was a different beast. It dragged the Carver Meridian Group into the mud. If this leaked, the board would be forced to resign. The company's reputation would be destroyed. My son stole from veterans, Eleanor said. The grief in her voice was heavy, but it was quickly replaced by iron. He stole from the very people I built this company to serve. We have to be careful, I warned. If we expose this recklessly, the scandal will tank the stock price before I can even take over. We need to contain the blast. You are right, Eleanor said. Document it. Every penny. When we confront them, we use this. This is not just leverage. Lena, this is the nuclear option. If they refuse to sign the confession, we don't just sue them. We hand this specific file to the FBI. We hung up, and I went back to work. I needed to build a narrative that a jury could understand. Spreadsheets were boring. Stories were compelling.
I opened a new file. Timeline of coercion.
I spent the next 6 hours going through 10 years of my digital life. I exported every text message from Daniel and Victoria. I downloaded every voicemail I had saved. I categorized them by date and amount requested. June 2018. Daniel leaves a voicemail. Lena, sweetie, the IRS is being difficult about an audit. I need $20,000 by Friday, or they are going to put a lien on the house. You don't want your old dad on the street, do you? August 2019. Text from Victoria. Chase needs a new laptop for his design course. The one he has is too slow. Wire 2000. It is an investment in his future. December 2021. Email from Daniel. Subject: emergency surgery. He claimed he needed a hernia operation that insurance wouldn't cover. I wired $15,000. I cross-referenced the date with Victoria's social media. 2 weeks later, she posted photos from a wellness retreat in Sedona. There was no surgery. It was a sickening mosaic of manipulation. They had weaponized their love, or the performance of it, to strip mine my bank account. Then my phone rang. The screen flashed. Dad. My heart hammered. I stared at the phone. Was it a coincidence? Did they know? I hit record on my forensic software, linking the audio feed directly to the secure server. Then I answered. Hello? Lena! Daniel's voice was too loud, too cheerful. How are you, honey? Back in Denver, safe and sound? I am fine, Dad, I said, typing a note on my screen. Time of call, 2:15 p.m. Good, he stammered. Listen, about Thanksgiving, I know things got a little heated. Victoria is, well, she is passionate. She loves you, you know. She just wants the best for the family. Passionate is one word for assault, I said flatly. Now, let's not use legal words. Daniel laughed nervously. It was a misunderstanding. But look, I am calling about the paperwork. For the loan. I told you no, Dad. I know, he said, his voice dropping to a whine. But Chase is in a bind. The developers need a deposit by Monday. Just $50,000. That is all we need to hold the spot. We can work out the rest later. I don't have $50,000 liquid right now. I lied. Come on, Lena, he pushed. I know you have that CD maturing. Or, look, I didn't want to mention it, but remember when you co-signed for my truck lease 3 years ago? I didn't co-sign for your truck, I said, frowning. I sent you the cash for the down payment. Right, Daniel said quickly. But, well, the dealership needed a co-signer for the financing, and you were busy at work. So, I just went ahead and put your info down, expedited the process. It has been paid on time. Mostly, but if you could just authorize a small release of funds, it would really help smooth things over with the credit bureau. I froze. The recording indicator on my screen blinked red. Dad, I asked slowly, are you telling me you used my social security number to take out a loan without my permission? It wasn't like that, he panicked. It was implied permission. You always help us. I just signed your name to save you the paperwork. Families do that. Lena, it is standard procedure. Standard procedure, I repeated. You forged my signature on a vehicle finance agreement. Don't make it sound like a crime, he snapped, his tone turning nasty. I am your father. I have a right to survive. Are you going to help or not? I will think about it, I said. I have to go. You think about it, he said. And remember, Lena, nobody likes a girl who forgets where she came from. He hung up. I saved the recording. I backed it up to 3 different servers. He had just confessed to identity theft and credit fraud on tape. Harriet Lowell was going to have a field day with this. A moment later, an email arrived from Eleanor. Subject, the smoking gun. Attached was an audio file. The note read, recorded 4 months ago in my study. Victoria thought I was asleep in my chair. I put on my noise-canceling headphones and clicked play. The audio was slightly grainy, but the voices were distinct. She is not going to last another winter. Daniel, Victoria's voice hissed. The doctor said her heart is weak. Don't talk like that, Daniel mumbled. I am being practical, Victoria snapped. If she dies before she signs the transfer, the estate goes into probate. That could take years. The taxes will kill us. We need to move the assets now. Tell her it is for tax efficiency. Tell her it protects the money from the government. Once it is in your name, we can liquidate the real estate portfolio. She is sharp, Vic. She asks questions. Then we stop answering them, Victoria said, her voice dropping to a chilling calm. We isolate her, change her phone number, fire that nosy nurse. If she is confused and lonely, she will sign anything just to have you sit with her for an hour. We need that money. Daniel, I am not going back to flying commercial. I took off the headphones. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from pure, white-hot rage. I am not going back to flying commercial. That was their motivation, not survival, not legacy, not even greed. Really, it was vanity. They were willing to imprison an old woman and defraud a charity so Victoria didn't have to sit in economy class. I compiled everything. The shell companies, the crypto laundering, the hacked IP logs, the identity theft confession, the embezzlement from the charity, the conspiracy to defraud Eleanor. I put it all into a single, encrypted presentation titled Project Thanksgiving. I called Eleanor back. I have it all, I said, and I have the timeline. Excellent, Eleanor said. I have spoken to the board. They are convening a special emergency session on Monday morning. They know a situation has arisen, but they don't know who is involved yet. Monday, I said. That is the day after the lunch. Precisely, Eleanor said. Sunday is for family, Monday is for execution. How do we get them to the lunch? I asked. After my call with Dad, he sounded desperate. He might bolt. He won't bolt, Eleanor said confidently. I just sent them an email. I told them I have decided to step down as chairman of Carver Meridian Group due to health reasons, and I want to discuss naming Daniel as my successor. I laughed. It was a dark, humorless sound. You promised him the crown. I promised him a discussion, Eleanor corrected, and we will have a discussion. It just won't be the one he expects. I will drive down Saturday night, I said. I want to be there when they arrive. I want to see their faces when they think they have won. Bring your laptop, Lena, Eleanor said, and wear something expensive. If you're going to take over an empire, you should dress the part. I looked at my reflection in the glass of my office window. The bruise on my cheek had faded to a dull yellow, easily covered with makeup, but the change in my eyes was permanent. I will see you Sunday, I said. I hung up and looked at the file one last time. I wasn't just bringing a laptop. I was bringing an eviction notice for their entire reality. The drive to Ravenwood Hill felt like ascending into a different atmosphere. My grandmother's estate wasn't just a home. It was a fortress of old money disguised as a country manor. The iron gate swung open silently as I approached, recognizing the transponder in my car, and I drove up the long, winding driveway lined with century-old oaks that stood like sentinels against the gray November sky. I parked my Audi out of sight, in the carriage house garage, just as Eleanor had instructed. Today, I wasn't supposed to be the successful executive with the luxury car. I was supposed to be the prodigal daughter returning to the fold, humble and chastised. Inside, the house was a hive of quiet, lethal activity. Eleanor was in the library, but she wasn't reading. She was standing next to Harriet Lowell, the fiercest corporate litigator in New York. Harriet was seated behind a bank of monitors that looked out of place amidst the mahogany bookshelves and leather-bound classics. Everything is live, Harriet said, not looking up as her fingers flew across a keyboard. We have 4K video feeds in the sunroom, the dining hall, and the foyer. Audio is crystal clear. I want to catch every syllable. Eleanor turned to me. She was dressed in a soft, lavender cardigan and a loose skirt, an outfit that screamed grandmotherly and harmless. She had even left her hair slightly looser than usual, giving her a slightly disheveled appearance. You are late, Eleanor said, but her eyes were twinkling with the adrenaline of the hunt. They will be here in 20 minutes. Do you remember the script? I am sorry, I recited, my voice flat. I was stressed. I didn't mean to cause a scene. I just want us to be a family again. With a little more trembling, if you can manage it, Eleanor critiqued. Victoria feeds on weakness. If you look strong, she will be guarded. If you look broken, she will tell us everything. I took a deep breath. I will be pathetic. Don't worry. Good, Eleanor said. She reached out and squeezed my hand. Remember, Lena, whatever they say to you in there, it isn't real. It is just noise before the crash. I went to the sunroom to wait. This was the trap. It was a beautiful room, walled with glass on 3 sides, overlooking the dormant rose gardens. A round table was set for 5. In the center was a massive, cascading arrangement of white orchids. I looked closer at the orchids. Buried deep within the moss and roots was a tiny black lens, no larger than a pinhead. Another was hidden in the cornice of the ceiling. A third was disguised in the motion sensor for the alarm system. I sat down, folding my hands in my lap, and waited for the wolves. At 12:30 sharp, I heard the gravel crunching in the driveway. I checked my phone one last time. I sent a text to Eleanor. Showtime. Then I slipped the phone into my pocket and started recording on the device taped to my ribcage, just as a failsafe. I heard them before I saw them. Victoria's voice carried through the hallway, high and performative. Oh, Look at this place. Daniel? It is just magnificent. Although, look at those drapes. They are looking a bit dusty. I will have to talk to the staff about that. She was already measuring the drapes. She hadn't even stolen the house yet, and she was already renovating it. They swept into the sunroom. Daniel was wearing a blazer that looked too tight, sweating slightly despite the chill. Chase was wearing a hoodie under a sport coat, looking bored and scrolling on his phone. And Victoria. Victoria was dressed for a coronation. She wore a structured red dress that looked aggressive, like a power suit disguised as cocktail attire. When she saw me, she paused. Her eyes narrowed, assessing the threat level. "Lena," she said, her voice cool. "I didn't know you would be joining us." "Grandma asked me to come," I said, keeping my eyes on the tablecloth. I wanted to apologize for Thanksgiving." Victoria's face relaxed instantly into a smug, satisfied smile. She walked over and patted my shoulder, a gesture that felt more like a dog owner praising an obedient pet than a hug. "Well," she sighed, "it takes a big person to admit when they are overwhelmed. We forgive you, darling. We know you have been under a lot of pressure at that job of yours." Daniel let out a massive sigh of relief. "See? I told you. Vic, we are all family here. Water under the bridge." Eleanor entered the room then. She walked slowly, leaning heavily on her cane, her hand trembling slightly as she reached for the back of her chair. "Thank you all for coming," Eleanor said, her voice thin and wavering. I felt terrible about how I acted on Thursday. I think my blood sugar was low, or maybe it is just, well, the doctor says my memory isn't what it used to be." She sat down with a heavy plop, looking confusedly at the silverware. "Where is the tea?" she murmured. "Did I order tea?" Victoria exchanged a look with Daniel. It was a look of pure, unadulterated greed. They thought she was losing it. "I will get the staff to bring it. Mother Carver," Victoria said soothingly, taking the seat next to her. "Don't you worry about a thing. You just relax. You have carried the weight of this family for so long. It is time you let us handle the details." Lunch was served, a delicate poached salmon that nobody tasted. The tension was vibrating in the air, hidden under layers of polite chit-chat. 20 minutes in, Eleanor laid down her fork. She looked around the table, her eyes watery and unfocused. "I have been thinking," she began, "about the estate, the paperwork. It is becoming too much. The lawyers send me these stacks of documents, and the numbers all run together. I don't know who to trust anymore." Daniel leaned forward, practically vibrating. "You can trust us, Mom. You know that." I know, Eleanor said. "But it is complicated. There are the trusts, the real estate holdings, the liquidity requirements." She looked at me. "Lena works with numbers. Maybe I should give Lena the power of attorney? Just for a trial period? She is very organized." It was the perfect bait. Victoria stiffened as if she had been electrocuted. She dropped her glass of water. Ice cubes skittered across the table. "Lena?" Victoria laughed, a sharp, jagged sound. "Mother Carver, surely you are joking." "She is good with computers," Eleanor mumbled. "She is a technician," Victoria exclaimed, her voice rising. "She fixes firewalls. She doesn't manage wealth. And frankly, look, I didn't want to bring this up, but we are all family here." She turned her body to block me out, focusing entirely on Eleanor. "Lena is not well," Victoria whispered loudly. "We have been very worried about her. She is erratic. She has these episodes. The outburst at Thanksgiving? That wasn't normal anger. That was instability. She is emotionally fragile." I clenched my hands under the table, digging my nails into my palms to keep from speaking. "Let them talk," Eleanor had said. "Silence is a weapon." "She is right, Grandma," Chase chimed in, speaking with his mouth full. "Lena is terrible with money. She tried to get into crypto last year and lost like 50 grand. She came crying to Dad about it. We had to bail her out." I stared at him. The lie was so bold, so completely inverted from reality, that it took my breath away. I had paid off his crypto losses. Now he was attributing his failure to me to discredit my competency. Harriet, watching from the library, must be having a field day. That was defamation, slander, and evidence of a coordinated gaslighting campaign. Lost money? Eleanor asked, looking fearful. Oh dear, I didn't know that. We didn't want to burden you, Victoria said smoothly. We have been covering for her mistakes for years. Why do you think she is still single at 32? Why do you think she lives alone in that cold apartment? She drives people away. Mother Carver. She is angry. She is bitter. You cannot hand the keys to the kingdom to someone who might burn the castle down just to get attention. I see, Eleanor said. She looked at me with fake disappointment. Lena, is this true? I looked down, biting my lip. I have made mistakes, I whispered. See, Daniel said, eager to please his wife. She admits it. She is a good girl, Mom, but she is not ready for the big leagues. She needs guidance, not responsibility. Eleanor sighed, a long, rattling sound. Then what do? I cannot manage it alone. I am terrified I will make a mistake and lose everything your father built. You won't lose anything, Victoria said, leaning in close, her voice dropping to a hypnotic purr. We have a plan. Daniel and I have been talking. We can take the burden off your shoulders completely.
How? Eleanor asked.
It is called a consolidated asset optimization, Victoria said, using buzzwords she had probably picked up from a brochure. We set up a master trust. Daniel becomes the primary trustee. We merge your holdings with Lena's small portfolio, just to keep it safe for her, of course, and we pool the resources. Merge them? Eleanor asked. But Lena's money is hers. She doesn't know how to use it, Victoria snapped, then quickly softened her tone. We would leverage the combined equity. Chase has found these incredible opportunities in commercial real estate in Costa Rica and Nevada. If we liquidate the low-yield bonds you are holding, which are ancient, by the way, and put that cash into Chase's developments, we could triple the family net worth in 5 years. There it was, the confession. They wanted to liquidate the safe, blue-chip assets of the Carver Empire and dump them into Chase's imaginary scams. It wasn't just theft. It was financial suicide. But, Eleanor said, her voice trembling, that sounds risky. What if I don't want to sell the bonds? Mother, Daniel said, his voice taking on a harder edge, you are not thinking clearly. You are stuck in the past. We are trying to save you from yourself. And what about Lena? Eleanor asked. What if she doesn't want to put her money into this master trust? Victoria turned to look at me. Her eyes were dead. There was no warmth, no humanity, just the cold calculation of a butcher looking at a piece of meat. Lena will understand, Victoria said. She has to. After everything we have done for her, she owes us. Owes you? Eleanor asked. She has paid your bills for 10 years. That was rent, Victoria hissed. Rent for the privilege of being part of this family. She is nothing without the Carver name, and if she refuses... Victoria paused, picking up her wineglass. If she refuses, Victoria continued, we will have to take steps to protect her. If she is unstable, as we believe she is, we can petition the court for guardianship. We can sign for her own good. I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the room temperature. They were explicitly outlining their plan to strip me of my rights. That seems harsh, Eleanor said softly. To force her. Sometimes love is harsh, Victoria said, taking a sip of wine. Is that why you hit her? Eleanor asked. The question hung in the air. It was sudden, sharp. It cut through the fog of financial jargon like a knife. Victoria froze. She lowered the glass slowly. I beg your pardon? At Thanksgiving, Eleanor said, dropping the confused act for just a fraction of a second, then recovering it. I saw the mark on her face. You hit her. Was that love? Victoria let out a scoffing laugh. She looked around the table. seeking validation from Daniel and Chase. "Oh, please," Victoria said, waving her hand dismissively. "Don't be dramatic. I didn't hit her. I disciplined her." "Disciplined?" Eleanor repeated. "She is 32 years old." "She was hysterical," Victoria said, her voice rising in defensiveness. "She was screaming at her father. She was threatening to ruin Chase's future. She needed a wake-up call. I slapped her to bring her back to reality. It happens. My mother did it to me. Her mother did it to her. It is not abuse. Mother Carver. It is parenting. Someone has to teach that girl respect, since Daniel clearly never did." I looked up then. I met Victoria's eyes. "So you admit it?" I asked quietly. "You admit you slapped me because I wouldn't give you money?" "I slapped you because you were being an insolent, selfish brat." Victoria spat. "And I would do it again. And you know what? You took it, because deep down, you know you deserved it. You know you are just a guest in our world, Lena, and guests should pay their way." She leaned back, looking triumphant. She thought she had won. She thought she had cowed me into submission and convinced the old lady that I was the villain. "So that is the proposal," Victoria said, turning back to Eleanor. "We draw up the papers tomorrow. Daniel takes power of attorney over your accounts and Lena's. We merge the funds. We fund Chase's project. And you can retire. You can go rest in that nice facility in Connecticut we found. We will take care of everything." The silence that followed was total. The camera in the orchid arrangement was recording. The microphone in the ceiling was transmitting. The recorder on my ribs was capturing the beat of my heart. Eleanor looked down at her hands. She took a deep breath. Then, she picked up her cane. She didn't use it to stand up. She lifted it a few inches and tapped the silver handle against the glass tabletop. Clink, clink. It was a light sound, but to me, it sounded like the gavel coming down in a courtroom. Eleanor raised her head. The confusion was gone. The watery eyes were dry and sharp as lasers. The trembling stopped. She sat up straight, her spine elongating until she seemed to tower over the table. "Thank you, Victoria," Eleanor said. Her voice was no longer the voice of a confused old woman. It was the voice of the chairman of the board. That was a very comprehensive presentation. Victoria blinked, sensing the shift but not understanding it yet. Well, we just want what is best." "You have outlined your strategy quite clearly," Eleanor continued, her tone icy. "Consolidation, liquidation, and the forcible incapacitation of a family member to seize their assets." "Now wait a minute," Daniel said, looking nervous. "Mom, you are using strange words." "I am using legal words, Daniel," Eleanor said. "Conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, extortion, assault." "What are you talking about?" Chase laughed nervously. "Grandma, you are confusing things again." "Am I?" Eleanor turned her gaze on him. "Chase, did you enjoy your trip to the Cayman Islands? Or rather, did your avatar enjoy setting up the shell company for Atlas Logistics Solutions?" Chase's face went white. How did you—" "And Victoria," Eleanor turned to her daughter-in-law, "that wellness retreat in Sedona, was the $15,000 Daniel wired you for his hernia surgery enough to cover the spa treatments? Or did you have to dip into the Maple Crest Holdings account too?" Victoria stood up, knocking her chair back. "What is this? Lena, what did you tell her?" I stood up too. I didn't tremble. I didn't look down. I looked her straight in the eye. "I told her everything," I said. "And thanks to you, now we have the rest on tape." "On tape?" Victoria looked around wildly. Eleanor pointed with her cane to the orchid arrangement. "Smile, Victoria," Eleanor said ruthlessly. "You are the star of the show, and my lawyer, Harriet, has been watching your performance from the library. She says it is an open and shut case." Daniel looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Lena, honey, this is a joke, right? We are family." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the silk handkerchief Eleanor had given me on Thanksgiving. It was still stained with a tiny dot of dried blood. "No,"
Dad, I said, we aren't family. You made that very clear. I am just a guest, and the guest is checking out.
Eleanor stood up. The lunch is over. I suggest you go home and pack, not for a vacation, but because tomorrow morning, the locks on your house will be changed, since, technically, I own the mortgage, and you are 6 months behind on payments without Lena's help. You can't do this, Victoria screamed, losing all composure. I will sue you. I will tell everyone you are senile.
Go ahead, Eleanor said calmly. We have the recording of you admitting you want to lock me up to get my money. I don't think a judge will find you very credible. She gestured to the door. Get out of my house, Eleanor commanded, before I have security throw you out. Victoria looked at me one last time. There was hate in her eyes, pure and unadulterated, but there was also fear. For the first time in 20 years, she looked at me and saw something other than a resource. She saw a threat. You will regret this, Victoria hissed. I doubt it, I said.
They scrambled out of the room, a chaotic retreat of angry whispers and terrified glances. We heard the front door slam, then the sound of Daniel's car engine revving too hard as they sped away. I sank back into my chair, the adrenaline leaving my body in a rush, leaving me shaking. Eleanor walked over to the orchid arrangement and plucked the tiny camera out of the moss. She held it up to the light. Did we get it? I asked. We got everything, Eleanor said. She looked at me and smiled. A fierce, victorious smile. Part 1 is complete. Now, let's call the board. The legal machinery of the Carver Meridian Group did not grind. It slashed. Less than 2 hours after Daniel's car had screeched out of the driveway at Ravenwood Hill, Harriet Lowell was standing in the chambers of a federal judge. She did not go in asking for favors. She went in with a 4-inch stack of evidence that included forensic accounting logs, sworn affidavits from Eleanor Carver, and a high-definition video recording of Victoria Carver admitting to a conspiracy to incapacitate a billionaire for financial gain. The filing was brutal in its precision. We were not just suing them, we were dismantling them. The charges listed were elder financial abuse, forgery of legal documents, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit grand larceny. By 3 p.m. on that Sunday, the banking alerts started firing. The first domino to fall was the joint checking account Daniel and Victoria used for their daily expenses, frozen. Next came the Maple Crest Holdings account in Arizona, frozen. Then, the personal accounts of Chase Carver, including the digital wallets we had identified through the blockchain analysis, locked. Harriet told me later that the bank's fraud department moved with unprecedented speed because the request came from the office of the chairman of Carver Meridian. When Eleanor Carver said there was fraud, the banks didn't ask questions. They just panicked and pulled the plug. I didn't sleep that night. I spent the hours between dusk and dawn preparing for the second front of the war, the boardroom. Monday morning broke with a gray, steel-colored sky over the city. I arrived at the Carver Meridian headquarters in downtown Denver at 7:45. I was wearing a charcoal suit that cost $3,000, one of the few luxuries I had allowed myself over the years, and carrying the laptop that held the smoking gun. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 9 o'clock. When I walked into the conference room, the atmosphere was so cold it could have cracked the mahogany table. The board of directors was a collection of 12 men and women who had managed the Carver billions for decades. They were serious, conservative people who viewed change as a threat. To them, I was just Daniel's daughter, the quiet tech girl they saw at Christmas parties, the one who fixed their iPhones but never sat at the adults' table. Eleanor sat at the head of the table. She looked impeccable, her weakness from the weekend entirely gone. She gestured for me to sit at her right hand, a seat usually reserved for the vice chairman. A ripple of unease went through the room. Ladies and gentlemen, Eleanor began, her voice steady, we have a crisis, but it is not a market crisis. It is an internal security threat involving members of my immediate family. She didn't sugarcoat it. She laid out the basics. The attempt to force her into a guardianship, the forgery of my signature, and the embezzlement of funds. This is a family matter, Eleanor, interrupted Arthur Vance. Arthur was a silver-haired man in his late 60s, a longtime friend of Daniel's and a member of the board for 20 years. He leaned back in his chair, looking at me with thinly veiled condescension. With all due respect, Arthur continued, freezing Daniel's assets seems extreme. Daniel is a good man. He is not a criminal. And frankly, bringing your granddaughter into this, it looks like a reaction to an emotional dispute. Are we really going to let a domestic squabble dictate corporate policy? He looked at me. Lena, dear, I am sure you are upset, but accuse your father of fraud? That is a heavy word. The room turned to me. They were waiting for me to shrink. They were waiting for the emotional instability that Victoria had warned them about. I stood up. I didn't smile. I connected my laptop to the main display screen. Mr. Vance, I said, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the room. I am not here as a granddaughter. I am here as the primary beneficiary of the Carver Trust, which holds 51% of the voting stock of this company, and I am here as a cybersecurity expert who has identified a breach in this company's firewall. I hit a key. The screen filled with a complex network map. This, I said, pointing to a red line pulsing on the screen, is a trace of an unauthorized access attempt into the Carver Meridian internal treasury server. It happened 3 weeks ago. The hacker attempted to bypass the dual-factor authentication to reroute a dividend payment of $250,000. The board members sat up straighter. Money got their attention. The attack was clumsy, I continued, but it was persistent. We traced the IP address. It did not come from Russia or North Korea. It came from a residential address in Lakewood Heights. I clicked to the next slide. It showed a photo of Chase, alongside his digital fingerprint. This is Chase Carver, I said. He used his personal laptop. He used the Wi-Fi network paid for by my credit card, and he used credentials he stole from Daniel Carver's home office. This is not a family squabble. Mr. Vance, this is corporate espionage and attempted theft of shareholder assets. The room was silent. Arthur Vance looked pale. Furthermore, I said, pulling up the records of the charity fraud, we have evidence that funds from the Veterans Housing Initiative were diverted to a shell company controlled by Daniel and Chase Carver. That is a federal crime involving a nonprofit. If this leaks before we control the narrative, the SEC will be in this room by Friday. This is preposterous, Arthur sputtered, though he looked less sure now. Daniel would never knowingly steal from veterans. He probably didn't know what he was signing. He trusts his wife. He trusts her, Eleanor cut in, her voice razor-sharp. And you trust him, Arthur, which is interesting. Eleanor slid a single piece of paper across the long table. It stopped perfectly in front of Arthur. What is this? Arthur asked. An email, Eleanor said, from you to Daniel, dated 4 years ago. Arthur picked it up. As he read, his face turned a shade of gray that matched the sky outside. Read it, Eleanor commanded. Arthur swallowed hard. He didn't speak. I will read it, Eleanor said. She recited it from memory. Daniel, I reviewed the financials for Maplecrest as you asked. The structure is highly irregular. If the IRS looks at this, they will call it tax evasion or worse. You need to rein Victoria in before she drags you down. That was your advice. Arthur, you knew. You knew 4 years ago that they were setting up illegal shelters, and you didn't report it to the board. You protected a friend instead of protecting the firm. The silence in the room was absolute. Arthur Vance slumped in his chair. He was finished. Daniel is not a victim, Eleanor declared, looking around the table. He is an accomplice, and anyone who defends him from this moment on will be considered complicit in the fraud. She turned to me. Lena has been appointed as the interim auditor for this investigation, Eleanor announced. She has full authority to scrub the books. Does anyone have an objection? No one raised a hand. The skepticism was gone, replaced by fear and a newfound, terrifying respect. They weren't looking at the tech girl anymore. They were looking at the person who had just decapitated one of the most powerful men in the room with a single email. While we were securing the castle, the cottage was burning. According to the reports we received later from the private investigators, Harriet had stationed outside the Lakewood house. The reality of the situation hit Daniel at 10:30 in the morning. He had gone to the gas station to fill up his SUV. When he swiped his Platinum Amex, the machine flashed, declined. He tried his Visa, declined. He tried his debit card, contact bank. He reportedly stood there for 5 minutes, arguing with the pump, before getting back in his car and driving home in a panic. Inside the house, Victoria was in full damage control mode. She wasn't panicking, at least not visibly. She was on the phone, calling every lawyer in her contact list. But there was a problem. Retainers require money, and her checks were bouncing across the state. She told Daniel it was a mistake, a banking error. She told him Eleanor was just playing games and that they would sue us for harassment. She was still trying to gaslight him, even as the water rose above their heads. Then the courier arrived. At noon, a process server handed them a thick envelope from the offices of Lowell and Associates. It wasn't just the lawsuit. It was a formal cease and desist order. The letter was explicit. Daniel and Victoria Carver are hereby ordered to cease all communication with Lena Carver and Eleanor Carver. Any attempt to contact them via phone, email, text, or third party will be considered a violation of this legal notice and will be used as evidence of harassment in the pending criminal proceedings. Harriet had been brilliant. She knew their playbook. She knew Daniel would try to call me. He would try to cry, to guilt trip, to use the "but I am your dad" card. She cut the phone lines before he could even dial. By Tuesday, the story had started to leak. It began as a blind item in a local Denver business journal. Prominent philanthropic family embroiled in elder abuse scandal. Authorities looking into millions in missing funds. No names were mentioned. But in our social circles, that was enough. The phone at Daniel's house stopped ringing with support and started ringing with creditors. On Wednesday, Daniel was subpoenaed for a deposition. He arrived at Harriet's office looking 10 years older than he had at the lunch. He wasn't wearing his tailored suit. He was wearing a rumpled jacket and looking like a man who hadn't slept in 3 days. I watched from behind the one-way glass in the conference room. It felt strange to see my father like this. Small, frightened, and stripped of his bluster. I didn't know, Daniel kept saying to the camera recording the deposition. Victoria handled the books. She told me to sign. I just signed. I trust my wife. Harriet sat across from him, cool as ice. You didn't know? Harriet asked, sliding a transcript across the table. This is a transcript of a voicemail you left for Lena Carver on November 18th. In it, you admit to forging her signature on a truck lease. You called it standard procedure. Was forging your daughter's name Victoria's idea, or was that your own initiative? Daniel stared at the paper. He opened his mouth, then closed it. And here, Harriet continued, playing the audio clip from the lunch. This is you, Daniel. You are heard agreeing to a plan to declare your mother mentally incompetent to seize control of her assets. You say, she is stuck in the past. That doesn't sound like a man who is confused. That sounds like a man who is impatient to cash a check. Daniel put his head in his hands and began to weep. It wasn't a dignified cry. It was the sobbing of a child who had been caught stealing candy. Only the candy was worth millions and the punishment was prison. He tried to throw Victoria under the bus. He tried to blame Chase, but every time he pointed a finger, Harriet had a document with his signature on it, or a recording of his voice. He was trapped in the web he had helped spin. Chase fared no better. The FBI Cybercrimes Division had taken an interest in the unauthorized access to the Carver Meridian servers. When they raided the house on Thursday morning to seize electronics, they found Chase trying to microwave his hard drives. It turns out, microwaving a hard drive doesn't destroy the cloud backups. The IP logs I had provided were the nail in the coffin, but the metadata from his metaverse project was the dirt on top of the grave. We found chats where he explicitly discussed waiting for the old bat to kick it so he could fund his lifestyle. He wasn't an entrepreneur. He was a waiting heir who got tired of waiting. On Friday, 1 week after the lunch from hell, Eleanor called another meeting. This time, It wasn't the full board, it was the executive committee. We met in her private office, a room that smelled of leather and power. "The initial forensic audit is complete," Eleanor said. She looked tired, but her eyes were clear. "The damage is significant, but contained. We can recover the funds from the shell companies, though it will take time. Victoria is liquidating her jewelry, I hear." She paused, looking at the faces around the room. "This week has been a trial by fire," Eleanor said, "but it has clarified the future of this company. I am 82 years old. I cannot fight these battles forever." She turned to me. "I am nominating Lena Carver as the executive chairwoman of the board, effective immediately. She will oversee the restructuring and the legal proceedings against the former family members." The room was silent for a second. Then, Arthur Vance, who had somehow survived the week by turning state's witness against Daniel, was the first to nod. "She handled the data breach well," Arthur mumbled. "She has the right temperament." "She has more than temperament," Eleanor said, looking at me with pride. "She has integrity, something this family has been short on lately." I looked around the room. I saw respect. I saw fear. I saw acceptance. I was the executive chairwoman. I was 32, and I controlled $1 billion empire. But as I walked out of the building that evening, the cold wind hitting my face, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt a heavy, hollow ache in the center of my chest. I sat in my car and looked at my phone. I had blocked their numbers, but I could see the blocked call log. Daniel had tried to call me 42 times in the last 3 days. I imagined him in that big, cold house, with the heat turned off because the utility bill bounced. I imagined Victoria screaming at him. I imagined the silence that would follow. I had won. I had destroyed the people who hurt me. I had protected my grandmother. I had secured my future. But I had also done the one thing I promised myself I would never do when I was a little girl, waiting for my dad to come home. I had made myself an orphan. I put the car in gear and drove toward the mountains. The rearview mirror showed the city lights fading behind me, and with them, the illusion of the family I had spent a lifetime trying to buy. It was gone, and the only thing left to do was drive forward, alone, into the dark. The year that followed the reconciliation lunch did not pass quickly. It dragged. It was a slow, grinding year defined by the billable hours of lawyers, the quiet hum of forensic accountants' servers, and the sterile lighting of deposition rooms. We lived in a state of suspended animation. My father and stepmother remained in their house, though the bank had initiated foreclosure proceedings that Harriet managed to stall just long enough to keep them in place, like bugs pinned to a corkboard, waiting for the final judgment. Now, it was November again. The leaves on the oak trees lining the driveway of Ravenwood Hill had turned the color of dried blood and old gold. It was Thanksgiving. I stood in the library of my grandmother's estate, looking out the window at the gray sky. "Are you sure about this?" I asked, turning to Eleanor. "Inviting them here? Today? It feels cruel or dangerous, or both." Eleanor was sitting by the fire, reading a file. She looked stronger than she had a year ago. The ruse of frailty had been abandoned completely. She wore a dark emerald velvet suit that made her look regal and imposing. "It is strategic, Lena," she said, closing the file. "Harriet insisted. They have not been formally charged with the criminal counts yet. The indictment is sealed until tomorrow morning. If we exclude them today, they play the victim card. They tell the press we are isolating them. If we invite them, and they come, they demonstrate that they are still trying to maintain the facade. Besides..." She stood up, walking over to stand beside me. "Some truths should be exposed on the day people are busy talking about gratitude. I think it is poetic." "They will make a scene," I warned. "I am counting on it," Eleanor replied. "Security is doubled. Maya is coming. Your Aunt Sarah is coming. The same audience that watched you be humiliated last year will be here to witness the correction of the record." I checked my watch. It was 3:00 in the afternoon. They would be here any minute. The guest list had been curated with surgical precision. We invited only the family members who had been present at Daniel's house the year before, the witnesses to the slap, the witnesses to the gaslighting. Aunt Sarah and Uncle Robert arrived first, looking uncomfortable. They hugged me a little too tightly, their eyes darting around the room as if looking for wiretaps. They knew. Everyone knew something was happening. The rumors of the financial irregularity investigation had been circulating in the Lakewood Country Club for months, turning Daniel and Victoria into social pariahs, though no one knew the specifics yet. Then the car arrived. I watched from the window as Daniel's SUV pulled up. It hadn't been washed in weeks. There was a dent in the rear bumper that hadn't been fixed, a small detail that screamed of their financial collapse more loudly than any bank statement. They stepped out. Victoria was wearing a white fur coat that I knew for a fact she had bought with money siphoned from the Maple Crest Shell Company 3 years ago. Her makeup was heavy, a thick layer of foundation trying to hide the hollows under her eyes and the new lines of stress around her mouth. She held her head high, smiling at the empty driveway, performing for an audience of ghosts. Daniel looked smaller. His suit hung loosely on his frame, and his hair, usually dyed a rich chestnut, was showing roots of stark gray. He walked with a shuffle, linking his arm through Victoria's not out of affection, but out of a desperate need for stability. "Showtime," I whispered to myself. I went to the foyer to greet them. I didn't offer a hug. I didn't offer a hand. I just stood there, the executive chairwoman of the company they had tried to steal, and nodded. "Father, Victoria," I said. "Lena," Daniel said, his voice cracking. He looked at me with a mixture of fear and longing. "You look expensive." "I am," I said. "Come in. Drinks are in the drawing room." Victoria swept past me, bringing a gust of cold air and stale perfume. "Ravenwood looks tired," she commented, her voice shrill. "The landscaping needs work. If I were managing this estate, I would have the hedges trimmed differently." "You won't be managing this estate," I said to her back, "so I wouldn't worry about the hedges." She stiffened but didn't turn around. She marched into the drawing room, ready to play the role of the misunderstood matriarch one last time. The cocktail hour was excruciating. The air in the room was so thick with tension it felt hard to breathe. The relatives clustered in corners, speaking in hushed tones, avoiding the center of the room where Daniel and Victoria stood. It was like watching a high school cafeteria where the popular kids had suddenly become radioactive. Victoria tried to circulate. She walked up to Aunt Sarah, flashing a bright, brittle smile. "Sarah, darling, I haven't seen you in ages," Victoria cooed. "We must do lunch. I have been so busy with legal matters, just routine estate planning. You know how tedious lawyers can be." Aunt Sarah took a step back, clutching her wineglass. I am sure. Victoria, we have been busy too. We are thinking of wintering in Aspen this year," Victoria lied loudly, looking around to see who was listening. "Daniel needs the mountain air. The stress of dealing with Eleanor's decline has been hard on him." I stood by the fireplace, watching her weave this tapestry of lies. It was fascinating, in a morbid way. She was standing on the deck of the Titanic, the water rising past her ankles, discussing which ski resort to visit. Daniel stood by the bar, drinking scotch faster than he should. He didn't talk to anyone. He just watched Eleanor. My grandmother sat in her favorite armchair, silent and observant. She looked like a sphinx every time Daniel looked at her. She held his gaze until he was forced to look away, shame flushing his neck a deep, blotchy red. "Dinner is served," the house manager announced. We moved to the dining room. It was the same table where the reconciliation lunch had happened, but the atmosphere was different now. The cameras were gone, or rather, they were no longer hidden. A large, sleek television screen had been mounted on the wall opposite the table, currently dark. We sat. The sound of silverware scraping against china was the only noise. "So," Uncle Robert said, his voice too loud in the quiet, How is the market treating everyone?" "Volatile," I said. "Excellent," Victoria corrected immediately. Our portfolio is up 12% this quarter. Daniel has a golden touch. Daniel choked on his water. He coughed into his napkin, his eyes watering. He knew, and I knew, that his portfolio balance was currently $0.00, frozen by a federal injunction. Is that right, Daniel? Eleanor asked, buttering a roll. 12%? That is impressive for accounts that have been flagged for suspicious activity. Victoria slammed her fork down. Mother Carver, really, must we discuss business at Thanksgiving? It is rude. I think truth is never rude, Eleanor said. It is just inconvenient. Suddenly, the large television on the wall flickered to life. It wasn't a movie, it was the local news channel. I saw Harriet standing in the doorway of the dining room, a remote control in her hand. The anchor's face filled the screen. Breaking news this evening. Sources close to the district attorney's office have confirmed that a major indictment is expected tomorrow regarding a high-profile case of elder financial abuse and corporate embezzlement. The room went deathly still. Victoria stopped chewing. While names have not yet been released, the reporter continued, the investigation centers on a prominent family in Lakewood Heights and involves allegations of forgery, identity theft, and the misappropriation of funds from a veterans' charity. Legal experts say the charges could carry sentences of up to 20 years in federal prison. Daniel made a sound like a wounded animal, a high, soft whimper. Victoria stood up. Her chair screeched against the hardwood floor. Turn it off, she screamed. Turn that trash off. It is lies, all of it. She looked around the table, her eyes wild. Don't look at me like that, she yelled at Aunt Sarah. It is the media. They are making it up. They hate successful people. We are innocent. We haven't done anything wrong. Sit down, Victoria, Eleanor said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of a judge's gavel. I will not sit down, Victoria shouted. I am leaving. Daniel, get the car. We are not staying here to be insulted by these jealous, petty people. Daniel didn't move. He was staring at the TV screen, where the B-roll footage showed a blurred image of a house. It was his house. I said sit down, Eleanor repeated. She signaled to the head of security, who stepped forward from the shadows of the hallway, blocking the exit. You are free to leave whenever you like, Eleanor said. But before you do, there is one thing I need to say, and I think everyone here needs to see it. Consider it the final course before dessert. Eleanor nodded to Harriet. The image on the screen changed. The news report vanished. In its place, a grainy but high-definition video appeared. The timestamp in the corner read, November 24th, 2024. It was the kitchen in Daniel's house. A collective gasp went through the room. I saw myself on the screen, a year younger, looking terrified and cornered against the granite counter. I saw Victoria, her face twisted in rage. And then, the sound. Crack! The slap echoed through the elegant dining room of Ravenwood Hill, amplified by the surround sound speakers. It was brutal. It was violent. On the screen, Victoria grabbed my coat. Her voice hissed out, clear as day. I fed you. I own you. Lena, I fed you, so I have the right to teach you. In the dining room, the real Victoria went pale. Her white fur coat seemed to swallow her as she shrank back. That is out of context, she stammered, looking at the horrified faces of the relatives. She provoked me. You don't understand. We understand perfectly, Eleanor said. But there is more. The video cut, the scene changed. Now it was the sunroom at Ravenwood Hill, the reconciliation lunch. The orchid centerpiece was in the foreground. Victoria's voice filled the room again, smooth and calculating this time. If she refuses, we will have to take steps to protect her. If she is unstable, we can petition the court for guardianship. We can sign for her own good. Then Daniel's voice. She is stuck in the past. We are trying to save you from yourself. Then Victoria again, laughing. She is nothing without the Carver name, and if she refuses, she will have to understand. She still owes us. The video ended.
The screen went black. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. Uncle Robert was looking at Daniel with an expression of pure disgust. Aunt Sarah was crying silently, her hand over her mouth. Victoria stood there, trembling. The mask was gone. The dashing hostess was gone. All that was left was a desperate, cruel woman who had been caught in high definition. She lunged toward the table, grabbing a heavy crystal water pitcher. "You bitch!" she screamed, staring at me. "You set us up! You recorded us!" She raised the pitcher as if to throw it. "Victoria!" Daniel shouted. But before she could move, the security guard was there. He didn't touch her. He just stepped between us. A wall of muscle. Eleanor stood up. She walked around the table until she was standing 3 feet from Victoria. She didn't flinch at the raised pitcher. She looked at her daughter-in-law with eyes that were cold and dead. "That," Eleanor said, pointing to the black screen, "was the last time in your life you will ever touch my granddaughter. Do you understand me?" Victoria lowered the pitcher, her breathing ragged. She looked at Daniel, waiting for him to defend her, waiting for him to yell at his mother. Daniel stayed seated. He was staring at his hands. "Daniel?" Victoria whispered. Tell them it was just talk." Daniel looked up. Tears were streaming down his face. He looked at the screen, then at me. "I didn't know," he whispered. "Didn't know what, Dad?" I asked, my voice calm. "You were there. You are in the video." "I didn't know it looked like that," he sobbed. I didn't know I sounded like that. I thought we were just doing business." "Business?" I stood up. "You were planning to lock your mother in a nursing home and your daughter in a psychiatric ward so you could fly first class. That isn't business. Dad, that is evil." "I am sorry," he wept, reaching a hand out toward me. "Lena, baby, please, I am sorry. I was scared," Victoria said. "Don't you dare blame me," Victoria shrieked, turning on him. "You spineless coward. You wanted the money just as much as I did. You signed the checks. You drove the car. Don't you sit there and play the innocent victim now." "I am not playing," Daniel yelled back, standing up and knocking his chair over. "I lost my daughter because of you. Look at her. She hates me." "She always hated you," Victoria spat. "She is just like her mother, cold, ungrateful." "Stop it!" Eleanor's voice cracked through the room like a whip. They both froze. "I will not have this brawling in my house," Eleanor said. "You have shamed this family enough." She looked at her son. The look on her face wasn't anger anymore. It was pity, and that was worse. "Daniel," she said softly, "you have spent your whole life waiting for me to die so you could be rich. You never realized that you were already rich. You had a daughter who would have walked through fire for you. You had a mother who loved you. And you sold us both for, what? For a kitchen renovation? For a country club membership?" Daniel slumped, his shoulders shaking. "Tomorrow morning," Eleanor announced, addressing the entire room. "At 9 o'clock, the United States District Court will unseal the indictment against Daniel Carver, Victoria Carver, and Chase Carver." She paused, letting the weight of the federal government settle into the room. "I will be there," Eleanor said. "Lena will be there, and I invite all of you, family, witnesses, to be there too. If you want to know the truth, come to the courthouse. If you want to believe the lies, you can leave with Daniel and Victoria right now." No one moved. Aunt Sarah looked down at her plate. Uncle Robert crossed his arms. Victoria looked around the room. She saw the walls closing in. She saw the loss of her status, her money, her freedom. She straightened her coat, trying to salvage one last scrap of dignity. "Fine," she sneered. "See you in court. My lawyer will tear you apart." "Your lawyer," Harriet spoke up from the doorway, "resigned an hour ago." His retainer check bounced. Victoria's face crumbled. She didn't scream this time. She just let out a small, choked sound of despair. She turned and walked out of the room, her heels clicking unevenly on the floor. She didn't wait for Daniel. Daniel stood there for a moment longer. He looked at me.
Lena, he whispered. Is there any way? I looked at the man who had forged my name, the man who had watched me get slapped and done nothing. Goodbye, Dad, I said. He nodded slowly, accepting the sentence. He turned and shuffled after his wife, a man walking into the winter night with nothing but the clothes on his back and the consequences of his own choices. The front door closed with a heavy, final thud. The room was silent. Eleanor sighed and sat back down. She picked up her wine glass, her hand steady. Well, she said, looking at the stunned relatives, I believe I promised you dessert. Who wants pumpkin pie? The federal courthouse in Denver was a cavern of marble and mahogany, designed to make you feel small in the presence of the law. On the morning of the trial, the hallways were choked with reporters. The Carver case had become a sensation, a perfect storm of old money, family betrayal, and high-stakes corporate drama. The headlines had shifted from financial irregularities to the Cinderella Revenge, a narrative that made my skin crawl, but at least they were finally pointing the cameras at the villains instead of the victim. I sat in the front row behind the prosecutor's table. Eleanor sat beside me. She wore black, not as a sign of mourning, but as a sign of finality. She held her cane in one hand and my hand in the other. Her grip was dry and cool. Across the aisle, the defense table looked like a sinking ship. Victoria sat on the far edge, dressed in a gray suit that was clearly bought off the rack, a stark contrast to the furs and silks she used to parade around in. Her hair was pulled back severely, highlighting the sharpness of her cheekbones and the terrified wideness of her eyes. Daniel sat in the middle, slumped over, staring at his hands as if they didn't belong to him. Chase was on the other end, twitching his leg nervously, looking less like a tech entrepreneur and more like a child waiting for the principal to expel him. The trial was not a long, drawn-out affair. Thanks to the mountain of evidence Eleanor and I had compiled, it was a surgical dismantling of their lives. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Martinez, who looked like she ate sharks for breakfast, stood up to present the opening arguments. She didn't use flowery language. She used data. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Martinez said, pacing in front of the box, "this is not a case about a family misunderstanding. This is a case about a systematic, decade-long conspiracy to defraud a vulnerable elderly woman and a trusting daughter. We will show you the logs, we will show you the bank transfers, and we will show you the violence used to enforce the silence." The evidence parade began. First came the digital forensics. The large screens in the courtroom displayed the timeline I had built. Every unauthorized access to the Carver Meridian servers, every transfer of funds to the shell companies in Nevada and the Cayman Islands. The IP addresses were projected in bold font, matching perfectly with the devices seized from Daniel's home. Then came the audio. The courtroom went dead silent as the recording from the reconciliation lunch played. Victoria's voice echoed off the high ceilings, cold and calculating, discussing the plan to declare Eleanor mentally incompetent. "We can petition the court for guardianship. We can sign for her own good." I saw the jurors' faces. They looked disgusted. One woman in the back row shook her head, looking from Victoria to Eleanor with pure contempt. But the nail in the coffin was the video. When the prosecutor played the footage from Thanksgiving, the slap, Victoria flinched in her seat. The sound of the strike was loud and sharp. Crack! Then came her voice, filled with venom. "I fed you. I own you." It stripped away any defense she had. Her lawyer, a court-appointed public defender who looked exhausted before the day even began, tried to argue that Victoria was under extreme financial stress and that Daniel was the true mastermind who had coerced her. It was a desperate pivot. My client was merely a supportive wife, the lawyer argued weakly. She followed her husband's lead. Mr. Carver was the signatory on the accounts. Mr. Carver was the face of the family. But that argument collapsed the moment the prosecutor cross-referenced the texts. She projected a text message exchange between Victoria and Chase, dated 2 days after a major transfer of stolen funds. "Victoria, the transfer cleared. Make sure you delete the logs this time. Your father is too stupid to check. But the auditors might. Chase. Got it. Happy birthday to the best money launderer in the game. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Chase put his head on the table. Victoria went pale, realizing her own son's arrogance had just destroyed her defense. When it was Chase's turn, he tried to bargain. He took the stand, sweating through his shirt, and tried to claim that he was just a technical consultant who didn't know where the money came from. I thought it was family money, Chase stammered, avoiding my eyes. I thought Grandma gave it to us. You thought your grandmother gave you money to set up a shell company in the Cayman Islands called Atlas Logistics Solutions, Inc., to steal from a veterans housing charity? Martinez asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. I didn't ask questions, Chase whispered. The IP logs show you didn't ask questions, Martinez said. They show you wrote the code to bypass the charity's firewall. You didn't receive the money. Mr. Carver, you stole it. Finally, it was Daniel's turn. He declined to testify, but before the sentencing, the judge allowed him to make a statement. He stood up slowly. He looked at the judge, then at Eleanor, and finally, he turned his body toward me. He was crying, real tears, not the manipulative crocodile tears I had seen for 10 years. He looked broken. I am sorry, Daniel choked out. I don't have any excuses. I wanted the easy life. I wanted to be the big man in the big house, and I let myself use you. He took a breath, his hands shaking. I looked at you, Lena, and I didn't see my daughter. I saw a wallet. I saw a safety net. And I am sorry. I hope one day you can find it in your heart to forgive a foolish old man. The courtroom went quiet, waiting for my reaction. The old Lena, the one who craved his approval, might have nodded. She might have cried. She might have offered a small smile of absolution. But I wasn't that Lena anymore. I looked at him, my face calm and composed. I didn't feel hate. I didn't feel love. I felt the indifference you feel towards a stranger who has bumped into you on the street. That is something you should tell your lawyer, Daniel, I said clearly. He flinched as if I had hit him. He nodded slowly, understanding finally that the bridge wasn't just burned, it was gone. The sentencing was swift. Victoria Carver was found guilty of elder financial abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, and money laundering. Because of the aggravated nature of the crime against a family member and the sheer scale of the theft, the judge showed no mercy. She was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison, with her assets seized to pay restitution to the Carver Meridian Group. Chase Carver was found guilty of wire fraud, violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, and larceny. He received 5 years. Daniel Carver, due to his cooperation in the final stages and his lack of prior technical involvement in the hacking, received a suspended sentence of 5 years probation. However, the judge imposed a strict financial ban. He was permanently barred from managing any trust, holding any power of attorney, or serving as a director of any company. He was also mandated to attend 2 years of cognitive behavioral therapy. As the gavel banged down, sealing their fates, I felt Eleanor squeeze my hand. It is done, she whispered. But it wasn't quite done. There was one last piece of business. While the bailiffs were preparing to take Victoria and Chase into custody, Harriet arranged for a brief, supervised meeting in a side conference room. We needed to settle the estate matters before they were transported. We walked into the small, windowless room. Daniel was sitting at a metal table, looking shell-shocked. Victoria was standing by the wall, handcuffed, flanked by a marshal. Chase was slumped in a chair, staring at the floor. Eleanor walked in first, followed by me and Harriet. "This is not a social call," Eleanor announced, standing at the head of the table. "This is the official restructuring of the Carver family assets." She nodded to Harriet, who placed a single document in front of Daniel. "For 40 years," Eleanor said, "you have all waited for my will. You have speculated, plotted, and stolen to ensure you got your slice of the pie. Well, here is the reality." She leaned forward, her voice iron hard. "There is no inheritance, not for you, Daniel, not for you. Chase, and certainly not for you. Victoria. Victoria let out a sharp gasp. You can't do that. We are family. I dissolved the family trust this morning, Eleanor said calmly. The entirety of my personal estate, every stock, every bond, every property, has been transferred into a new entity, the Carver Foundation, a charitable trust dedicated to financial literacy and veterans' aid. She turned to me. The only exception is the controlling interest in the Carver Meridian Group, which has been transferred to a private holding company. The sole owner and chairwoman of that company is Lena Carver. The room went silent. Daniel looked up at me, his eyes widening. He realized the magnitude of the shift. I wasn't just the daughter with a good job anymore. I was the owner of everything he had ever wanted. However, I spoke up, my voice steady. I am not my stepmother. I do not believe in starving people to teach them a lesson. I looked at Daniel. You are homeless. Dad, the bank took the house this morning. You have no income, no pension, and no assets. You are 63 years old. Daniel lowered his head, shame radiating off him in waves. I have authorized the foundation to provide you with a monthly stipend, I said. It is $2,500 a month. It is enough for a small apartment and food. It is not enough for country clubs or new cars. Daniel nodded, tears dripping onto the metal table. Thank you, Lena. Thank you. There are conditions, I cut him off. Condition 1. You attend every single therapy session mandated by the court. Condition 2. You sign a permanent restraining order preventing you from ever contacting me or Eleanor again. All communication goes through Harriet's office. I paused, looking at Victoria, who was seething in the corner. And condition 3, I said. You divorce her, immediately, and you never speak to her again. If you have any contact with Victoria or Chase, the stipend stops that same day, and you are on the street. I will sign, Daniel said instantly. He didn't even look at Victoria. I will sign anything. I want to be done. You bastard, Victoria screamed, lunging forward before the marshal held her back. You are leaving me? After everything I did for you? You ruined me, Victoria, Daniel said quietly. Signing the paper, Harriet slid toward him. You turned me into a criminal, and you made me lose my daughter. I never want to see you again. You will regret this, Victoria shrieked. Her face twisted into a mask of ugly hate. She turned her glare on me. You think you won, Lena. You are going to be alone. You will have all that money and no one to share it with. You will regret this for the rest of your life. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had terrorized my childhood, who had made me feel small and worthless, who had slapped me in my own kitchen. I don't think so, I said. I think I'm going to sleep just fine. The marshals took Victoria and Chase away. Victoria was still screaming as the door closed, her voice fading down the hallway until it was just silence. Daniel stood up. He looked at me one last time. Goodbye, Lena, he said softly. Goodbye, Daniel, I replied. He walked out of the room, a gray man in a gray suit, carrying his paperwork like a shield against the cold world waiting for him. When we were alone, Eleanor reached into her purse. She pulled out a small, heavy brass key. This is for the safety deposit box at the main branch, she said, placing it in my hand. It contains the original deeds, the incorporation papers, and the history of this family. It is yours now. I closed my fingers around the key. It felt warm. You did good, kid, Eleanor said, smiling. You didn't just survive them, you outsmarted them. We walked out of the courthouse together. The double doors swung open, and the cold November air hit us. It was sharp and clean. A wall of photographers was waiting at the bottom of the steps. Flashes popped like strobe lights. Reporters shouted questions. Miss Carver, how do you feel about your father's sentence? Lena, is it true you are taking over the company? Do you have a statement for the family? I stopped on the top step. Eleanor stood beside me. leaning on her cane but looking stronger than I had ever seen her. I looked at the cameras. I thought about the girl who had driven to Lakewood Heights a year ago, terrified of disappointing her father, ready to write another check just to buy a moment of peace. That girl was gone. "I don't have a statement for the family," I said, my voice clear and projecting over the noise. "Because the people who were sentenced today are not my family. They were just people who thought they could use blood as a currency." I paused, looking directly into the lens of the nearest camera. "I didn't do this for revenge. I did this to set a precedent. From today on, no one in this family is a victim anymore, and for the first time in a long time, the Carver name stands for integrity, not debt." I took Eleanor's arm, and we descended the stairs. The crowd parted for us. A black town car was waiting at the curb, the engine idling softly. The driver opened the door. I helped Eleanor in, then turned to look back at the courthouse one last time. It stood tall and gray against the sky, a monument to the past I was leaving behind. I slid into the leather seat of the car. The door closed with a solid, heavy thud, shutting out the noise of the reporters. It was quiet inside. It was peaceful. "Where to, Ms. Carver?" the driver asked, looking at me in the rearview mirror. I looked at the key in my hand. I looked at the road stretching out ahead of us, open and waiting. "To the office," I said. "We have work to do." The car pulled away, merging into the traffic, moving forward into a future that finally, completely, belonged to me. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please leave a comment below sharing your thoughts on the ending and let me know which country you are watching from to connect with our community. If you enjoyed seeing justice served, please subscribe to the channel Lila Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button so more people can hear this truth.